Know, this week we are super excited to be welcoming Kevin Reylek to the show. For anyone who doesn't know Kevin, Kevin is the man behind the amazing decks that have been coming out of Penguin Cards lately. Penguin Cards is a subsection of Penguin Magic. Dude, Kevin, every time he comes on, always gets great questions, not only about his uncut sheets behind the scenes there, but the decks he's worked on. I'm really excited to actually give him a dedicated episode here where we can dive into anything and everything that this guy has had his hands in the playing card world. I mean, he's basically been doing this for like almost a decade, it feels like, if not more.
Yeah, he's old G.
He
He worked
is.
with Alex over at House of Playing Cards, and he's been around.
Dude, no doubt about that. I am
Yeah.
really excited for this one. Hopefully everyone out there is just as excited as us. So while you're watching, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Don't forget to ring the bell. It helps us out a lot.
You ready to do this, Steve?
Before we do anything, dude, that color yellow on you is dashing.
Thank you. It's like a nice like mustard. And you know what? I'll there you go. Repping a little bit of Kakando there. Can't go wrong with the Kakando merch. Loving it here. Big shout out to Max wherever he may be right now. Hopefully, I mean,
probably
it's late by him. Yeah, hopefully he's chilling, enjoying life. But you ready to do it?
Yep.
Let's do it, buddy. Kevin, what's up, man?
Yeah, Kevin.
We actually have you on for a show that isn't about a deck of cards, but it's about you. This is amazing, man. Can you believe it?
He's like, I gotta leave.
I can't, and even then, my mind is still on like, what are the next two releases that I can talk about?
So for another day, Kevin.
I mean, hey, you can share them. We're not going to stop you. We can talk about everything and anything here, but today is your day, Kevin, and we are so excited because honestly, we've had you on for a whole bunch of different decks. We had you on last year to do a little bit of a meet Kevin for the 52 plus Joker spot that you did on their virtual show, but this is finally the opportunity to sit down and find out anything and everything that you've had your hands in this playing card community, because honestly, I have no doubt that you've been touching on so many decks that people aren't even aware of. You know what? The person I can probably equate you to best is like Ito Huang. Ito is the dude who, like, anytime you're not thinking of him, you turn over a deck of cards and it's like designed by Ito Huang, and you're like, damn, man, Ito designed everything. But you are very similar in that scenario. You've had your hands in so many projects going back to the days of House of Playing Cards when Alex first started that. You were really the right-hand man there in that production side of things until now you're working with Penguin Magic in their card division, really like putting together some of these amazing decks that are coming out.
Thanks, man. It was funny that you mentioned Ito because we actually produced his very first deck at HOPC when I was there. So I've worked on several projects with him, and it's been awesome to see him grow into such a well-established, known designer. And that's happened with a few other folks out there. And obviously, I can't take credit for any artist's individual skill. Ito would have been successful whether I had been involved in any of his projects or not, and likewise for any artists that I've worked with. But yeah, it's funny to look at that with cards or with Magic. You know, you see sometimes convention photos, like Josh J pretty recently had posted a thing from an old Magi Fest. Josh runs the Magi Fest convention in Columbus, Ohio, and Arsenio Hall, when he was like a teenager, had been a part of the convention because he was a magician. Crazy. And then they're just like, oh, this kid magician, Arsenio, you know, and you never know kind of what someone's going to become. And same thing with people in this industry. You know, you see young creators, whether it's Magic or cards, and you're just like, oh, cool, they did a thing, and you never know when they're going to become the person who does 500 things and becomes really well known.
That's so cool. Well, hello, Mom. She made it into the chat early. My mom's here.
we were chatting about you earlier, Janice, and you're back in the day not being able to comment because you weren't logged in. So we're always glad to have you in the chat now. So now, Kevin, like you were saying, you've been around for a lot of the development and the evolution of custom playing cards. What really first got you into the industry as a producer for playing cards?
I think just my love of Magic and cards, and then my desire for things to exist. So anyone who's seen me on any of the other segments, and obviously the companies that I've worked for with Blue Crown and HOPC, and now with Penguin, sees that Magic connection. So I got into Magic when I was really young in late 1992. We can talk about that whole thing at some point. But then deck-wise, I was just an avid consumer of Magic and cards through my teens and college and whatnot. And I remember really well when Illusionist released their first Black Tiger deck and stuff, just being like
Nice.
super enthused of like, wow, like someone's doing something other than just plain bikes, tally hos, and bees. And so the first deck that I released, I put out in the fall of 2009. So I've been putting decks out for 12 years now. But it was the bicycle lefty deck, and the whole thing with that just was that the indexes, instead of being in the typical two corners, they were reversed. So you could call it like a reverse index deck.
Nice.
And that came about because there's a thing in Magic called a peak, where if you're gonna, most people, I'm a left-handed person, so most magicians or people, if they're gonna deal cards, they would hold the deck in their left hand and use their right hand to deal. And so if they wanted someone to peek at kind of the little index here, they would riffle down this corner, and that's a natural grip for them. For me, being a lefty, I hold the deck in my right hand and I deal with my left. And so if I wanted to do that, I would just do this with a blank corner and
Yeah.
there's nothing to be seen. And so I was like, man, it'd be nice if there was like kind of like a left-handed deck. And so I reached out to USPC and looked at some numbers and whatnot. This was late 2007 that I started thinking about it. And at first I was just going to try and like raise some money from friends and family and get like kind of investors in on it. And then of course 2008 happened and there was the huge crash. And so nobody wanted to put money into anything, especially decks of cards.
Yeah.
And this was pre-Kickstarter as well. So I just thought it was a cool idea and I wanted that deck to exist because I wanted to use it. At the time, the minimum print run at USPC was still 5,000 decks. And
you
so I took
imagine
out a
that
small
now?
business loan and I printed 5,000 decks of cards, and it was sort of sink or swim. Like I could have either fallen flat on my face or done well with them, but luckily they all sold out because, again, 2009 was a very different time on the market. So I certainly can't deny that it was a little easier to sell 5,000 of a particular deck back
Right.
then
Yeah.
than it is today. But
Yeah, your
yeah,
custom
that
deck
was
Unless you're
offerings back there.
certain, you know.
yeah. I jumped in with both feet and then just kept going from there.
Yeah, the custom deck scene must have been significantly different in 2009. I mean, you really
Oh,
weren't
sure.
even starting to see like, I mean, I don't want to say you weren't seeing custom decks because I think there's a lot of people out there who will argue that there have always been custom decks that deviate from the standard styling of
Yes,
what we know of a bicycle or tally ho deck, but like
sure.
custom decks not produced by one of these powerhouses. Like this was really the birth of custom playing cards for people for non-advertising purposes almost.
And it was still a ride
Yeah.
back, let's be honest.
Yeah, for years and years and years, obviously, you had cigarette companies, airlines, etc., that were making promotional decks. But that was the thing. Most custom decks for a long time, outside of whatever retail standards were being made, were promotional decks.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I say that the current modern custom deck market, as we look at it today, of being sort of centered around collectors, magicians, and cardistry, started with Illusionist with the Black Tiger deck, which was
Nice.
2004. Someone in the chat will correct me if I'm wrong.
I highly doubt you're wrong.
I also highly doubt anyone in the chat knows these things better than you do. So
For
um,
sure.
so yeah, it's been super interesting to watch. And yeah, there was a time where, I would buy a brick of every custom deck that came out. Because for a while then, after Illusionist dropped that, then they did the Ghost deck. And then, the
yeah,
other one starting, I want to say that Big Blind Media with their Carnival series, like they were pretty early on. But yeah, for a while, it was just well-established companies. Because again, it was very expensive to print a custom run with USPC with that 5,000 deck minimum. So, you were talking it was 15 grand to put out a custom deck, and they just weren't happening
Yeah.
that much. So it was like, okay, there's 4 a year, half a dozen a year. It was super easy to buy a brick because it wasn't like that much of a financial strain. Whereas now, when there's 20 new ones a week, I think people are getting a lot more selective, and buying less. It used to be sort of like I said, a no-brainer to buy a brick. I hardly buy bricks of anything anymore. I have to really like and love something to get
yeah.
a brick of it, because otherwise I'm already buried under cards.
Yeah.
Just with the ones that I have my hands in. So, but I still do buy cards that come to the market. But yeah, I think, you know, choice is never a bad thing. And people are just getting more and more into the brand styles and artists that speak to them. A deck being pretty isn't quite enough anymore just on its own, because
Yeah.
the bar has just been raised. So, but it's
It
cool.
really
It's
has.
amazing to see what everyone's doing with creative. Well, I just saw on Instagram earlier today. Lorenzo put a tease for this 9 deck box on the Portfolio 52
That's his
decks.
brick
Did you guys
box,
see it?
isn't it?
It's
Yeah,
a
I think
brick
so.
box,
Yeah,
but it only holds 9 decks and it has 3 different lids.
Right.
so
So
cool.
yeah, I'm like, yeah, like here people have been making custom brick boxes for however long, but nobody's done that till now. So like, there's still new ideas to be had, and it's
Yeah. I
it's
mean, I think
just
that
super cool to see. Yeah,
the important thing for people to do, and it's just like basically you look at these packaging companies and you just look at
Mhm.
cool packaging, because
Yeah.
I recently saw that 3-tier box because I was going to do it for my Visions deck
Sure
originally.
you were.
I was, and there's this one company that does amazing packaging, and I ended up using them for the box that I chose.
Yeah,
But they do product packaging, and they do wine
yeah,
bottles, they do wine glasses, they do colognes, perfumes, and different things like that. And those packaging ideas are brilliant for playing cards. You have
yeah.
Yannicka from Dutch Card House, who used the same company that I did for her last campaign for her was it Paisley's?
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
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 with that cool box that opened up and
Yeah.
then the top open. It's
yeah,
just really cool bringing other product packaging ideas into the playing card world because they are
yeah,
so creative and cool.
But you also have to be careful with that because then you look at things like happen with the Shield and the Arrow decks and the Luna decks where they used packaging from an alcohol brand which just happened to be patented that they weren't aware of. And
Yeah, no,
like
100%
and that's
for
where
sure.
doing your due diligence on that to make sure that you have the rights to use something creative.
Yeah,
You never think that like, oh, how a box opens would be protected, but in
right,
some situations it is. And in those
for
situations, you
sure.
definitely need to make sure you're doing your homework because you don't want to create the coolest tuck ever and then all of a sudden getting sued for it. Like that's no
Right.
fun. That puts a damper on the whole thing. But
yeah,
Nobody
it's
wants that
crazy.
cease and desist letter. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's interesting because, and I think we see this with Magic a lot too. And you mentioned earlier that you were really got big into Magic in the 90s. I think we see this with Magic a lot, especially recently. There's actually been a couple little hiccups with this creation of ideas in a vacuum and then bringing it to market. You don't always do that due diligence to make sure that someone else hasn't done this idea. I mean, granted, there were some issues recently with like blatant piracy, but there's also this idea that, any idea you come up with in Magic has probably in one form or another been done before. And are you building off an existing concept or is this a truly original idea? The same thing
Sure.
comes out with like all this stuff with packaging. You may come up with the coolest thing you've never seen in playing cards before, but it may have been
Yeah.
done in board games.
Yeah, and well, I mean that I've seen that happen so many times both in Magic and cards, and I am happy to say that most of the time when I see similar things, they tend to be cases of independent creation, which is really a good thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's no denying that there are unscrupulous people who will see something cool and just think that it's theirs for the taking. And most that I've seen, or there are some that I've been involved with, have worked out just fine. So I'll give a tease. So we'll
oh,
hit
we
the
like teasers.
non-existent elephant in the room. Penguin in early November is going to be putting out this deck, Roasters Coffee Shop,
Nice.
which I'm sure most people in the chat are familiar with the OPC Roasters.
Yeah,
We submitted this deck to USPC in October of last year,
yeah,
about 3 months before OPC. And so it was one of these independent creation things. So back in the spring, when I saw their first teaser for it, I reached out to them right away because USPC does not give exclusives to name, color, stock, and finish. Like there's a little bit of a list that they don't give exclusives on.
Yeah.
And so we had submitted our roasters in October. And then in December, I got a note from them saying, hey, another client has submitted a deck called Roasters, and it's also coffee themed, but the designs are really different. Just giving you a heads up. And, for privacy, they don't disclose who the other client is.
right.
And so, same with OPC. They told him, like, oh, hey, someone else has already submitted a Roasters thing, just so you're aware. And he didn't know who it was. So he kept moving forward, put his deck out. So when I saw the tease, I reached out to Cam immediately. I didn't know him at all. It was my first interaction with him.
Yeah.
So I made a little video and I had my proofs and stuff. And I was like, hey, I'm sure you got the same email from USPC that I did. And we had a great chat. And we both like, this was a case where it was super easy to know that we had obviously independently created coffee themed decks called Roasters.
Right.
And just neither of us had a problem with it. I was like, yeah, ours isn't coming out for several months. I'm like, yeah, go ahead, release yours now. And then like in a few more months when ours comes out, I was like, please just make sure if anyone comes to you being like, hey, Penguin ripped you off, like please correct them.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason that these can't exist on the market together. Like, yes, they're similarly named, but they have very different designs. And like that's our card back, which is super different from what Cam did.
And you have
So
totally different like audiences. 100% different.
sure.
You
But
know?
so I've seen that in Magic where people will come up with similar methods or similar anything, and same with cards, similar themes, similar designs, similar deck names. And yeah, you as much as you try and do research, like whenever I come up with a new magic trick method or something that I think is new, I'll ask around about it. So like at HOPC, this was funny. We had our Blue Crown rather, same company really, just two different websites. We had released a thing. It was one of Alex's tricks using sugar packets. It was a color changing sugar packet. So like yellow, he waved it, turned to pink. I watched him do this trick at Magic conventions for people for like 7 or 8 years before we put it out on DVD. And he had lectured on it, all this stuff. So it was out there. Like thousands of magicians saw this thing before it had like an official release. And then a week or so after we released it, someone emailed us and was like, hey, this was a thing in someone's lecture notes at a convention like however many years ago. And it just took being seen by that many people to find that there was this sort of obscure reference that someone else had explored the same idea. And so we reached out immediately and said, hey, this was just brought to our attention, we have this product out. And they were totally cool with it. I think most people are reasonable, and as long as there's a willingness to communicate, then
Right.
everything can get resolved. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And I mean, I've seen my deck idea list is humongous over the last 12 years. And I've had ideas on there that then I've seen either sometimes just for a broad theme or sometimes for a deck name where I'm like, oh, this would be a cool name for a deck. But there's only so many ideas out there. And there's so many people now producing decks of cards that someone else is going to think of the same thing.
Yeah. Well,
And
we see
so
it a
I've
lot.
seen, yeah, well, it's funny, like block playing cards.
Yeah.
Nothing against them. Pandrea and I sat down, I don't know how many years before they put out their first deck, talking about doing exactly that, being
Yeah.
like, hey, what if we did a deck that was just like wood texture on the back? So like, yeah, I know they didn't copy us because we never put it out there, but it's just
Right.
they had the same idea. Like,
And then Alex
Um,
just did his Minox series and came out with a wood one, and everyone's like, "You copied block."
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
the irony of it though too is we also see these waves and themes. So like you'll see on Kickstarter, like an Egyptian deck will go up and it'll crush. And then
Yep.
over the next 6 months, like 4 other Egyptian decks will come out. Some of them are great. Some of them are really just like quick thrown together, like cash grab projects. And it's like people realize, hey, there's success associated with a theme. Let's try that theme for ourselves and see how it plays out. So it's almost
Yeah.
inevitable that you don't. And again, it's not copying. You said, like you said, there's a bit of independent creation to it, but also there's a bit of seeing someone be successful at something and wanting to put their own spin on it.
Sure. And yeah, you see that sometimes in Magic, there will be a wave where sort of everyone is obsessed with like the new levitation or a new, whatever penetration, or there's only so many plots in Magic.
Yeah.
And some of those will resurface and have kind of a hot period where it's like, oh man, right now there was a bunch of new wallets that came out, or there was a bunch of new methods for torn and restored card. And yeah, they're not like copying each other, but they're all kind of like, oh, like this is cool. I like the effect, but maybe I need a method that has a different feature that is more practical for a certain situation or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah. So no, I'm really never bothered if I see similar stuff come out, unless it's one of these cases where it's just like a clear rip off of something that was totally unique, and then whatever comes after is in a timeline. Well, that happened when we put out our very first deck at Penguin, the Honeybees. I think about 2 weeks later, Illusionist released their Bumblebees, which was their first bee themed deck. And so we're talking 2 weeks. Like clearly these decks were developed separately.
Yeah.
And I was getting notes from people being like, hey, you just did the honeybees and now like Illusionist is copying you with bumblebees. I was like, no, they're not. I was like, I was like, first of all, you can't even get a USPC deck printed in 2 weeks,
Right.
Yeah.
much less even 2 months. I was like, there's no way that they turned around custom artwork, got them printed, got them in hand in their factory in this amount of time. I'm like, it's just that, hey, B is a super established brand in our world. It's almost like people would say, hey, let's like put a twist on that and do some other sort of B themed deck.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
a far reach. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I think, we see it, with it. First of all, the magic community, as small as it is huge, right? There's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of magicians who are creating things, and we have a 12-year-old kid that creates cool gimmicks, and a lot of people might not see them, so there
Yeah.
are plenty of people creating their own gimmicks and tricks, and they're putting them out there. They're sharing them to their people that are following them, and
Yeah.
it might be for a year, 2 years, and their followers are like, oh, dope, this person created this. And then all of a sudden, someone like Murphy's would come out with it,
Right.
and it might be the same exact thing. Doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean they copied, but
Right.
it doesn't necessarily mean they did it.
Sure.
Like it's just such
With
a
that,
a big
all I think anyone can ask for is for people to put in some effort. So it's one thing to like invent a trick and then film a download and release it a week later and just be like, hey, I invented this.
right.
Yeah.
So be it. Like, I think as long as there's effort into research, and that effort can vary from showing it around to your own magician friends, depending on how knowledgeable they are. But the nice thing, again, like you said, the magic community is so big, but also so small. Like, the most knowledgeable historian magicians are accessible.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can email these people and be like, people I know have reached out to. I don't want to name names because I don't want people to start bothering lots of them, but you can reach out to the librarian at the Magic Castle and be like, hey, like, I think I invented this. Like, have you maybe ever seen this before? Or, at the very least, Googling around, searching forums, searching whatever, and putting in that effort. So, yeah, I would hope that most people aren't releasing whatever, within a week or a month of creating it, just because I think
Right.
there is time required to do that due diligence. Because that happens anytime I come up with a new idea. My first thought is, all right, someone probably has done this before, and I'll spend a bunch of time. I have a marking system for tally ho circlebacks, and I didn't publish it. I published a small run of 50 booklets in late 2017, and I had come up with the system in early 2016. So I waited like a year and a half and looked around everywhere I could to see if anyone had done anything similar, and there was nothing published. So then I finally felt good enough to put it out. So yeah.
And one of
And
the
then, I
other
mean,
things,
obviously, you never know. Once in a while, you'll find things where you come across something that someone has shown to just their inner circle and it's been unpublished. And so it's verified that they created it before you,
Right.
but it wasn't like out there for you to find or to purchase. And so then that's a whole like other gray area. It's weird. I don't know. We don't have to keep talking about this topic,
No,
obviously.
I mean, I think it's great,
I think,
fascinating.
yeah. I mean, we even seen recently there was another situation where two people put out a very similar gimmick in the sense of the end result, but how they got there was completely different. And there was all
Mm.
this controversy around it until both creators came out and were like, listen, like, turns out we do this completely different ways than neither of us even thought of. So while
Right.
they had the same end impact, they're not the same method. So don't be hating on either person. And it was really interesting to see that creative aspect where the people who really do try and get that due diligence out there are really making sure that, they're giving credit where it's due. They're doing the legwork to make sure they're not ripping someone else off, that someone else hasn't done it in the past, that there is no, and again, like it's tough because we also have this mentality in this day and age where everything's on the internet. That's not necessarily the case.
Not
And so,
necessarily true. Yeah.
yeah, and so just because you don't see it on the internet doesn't mean that some person who lives halfway across the world who isn't on the internet wasn't doing it 10 years ago. And so really, it's not just a matter of like a quick scroll. Like you said, it takes time. And I think that's really important for people to realize, not only in the magic world, but in the playing card world as well, because just because two people do a space themed deck, I'm pulling this out of my head here, but
Sure.
like just because two people do a space themed deck doesn't mean you don't have two different artistic interpretations of what a space themed deck should look like. And so
Right.
just because there's a shared theme, you may like one art style better than the other. You might love them both and you want to support them both. But I think
Yeah.
that's what we as a community need to realize is that yes, sometimes there are malicious actors, but in
Yeah.
most cases, those malicious actors are few and far between in comparison to just general coincidence,
Yeah.
or inspiration. So,
And that's always my thing. Like, if I see something come along that's similar to something that I've put out, my first reaction is never, "You stole this from me."
yeah.
And that's what I hope becomes a more common mindset, because I've had that happen with several decks over the years where we put something out and I get a message on Instagram or whatever from someone who's like, "Hey, I teased this thing and you stole this from me." And I'm like, "No, I really have no reason to steal it from you. Like, if I see something that I like, I'll buy it from you."
Yeah.
Like, you
I got
know?
enough. I got enough money to buy it from you.
Not me personally, but the company that I work for can pay artists.
Well, and it's funny to think though too, because again, like this misconception that you could easily just from a 30-second, 1-minute trailer reverse engineer exactly how a gimmick could work.
Yeah,
Like you may actually, and again, you may actually like the end result and design your whole thing around it being inspired by that, but ultimately it could be two different approaches. And like
sure.
it's so tough for people to wrap their head around that because and we see it I think so much more in movies and television and all that. There are no original ideas anymore. That's what
Yeah.
people always say. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm sure there's someone out there who's got some crazy original idea that just isn't
Oh,
maybe
sure.
safe for television, we'll call it, or something. I don't know. But at the end of the day, like the originality of ideas doesn't necessarily prohibit future creation on top of those original ideas.
I mean, that's like
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
Like we were
Yeah.
talking about last week. There's only 8 chords, right? On a piano. It's
Yeah.
like everybody like uses little parts of old songs. They get inspiration from old songs. There's only so many things you could do, but there's endless music. There'll always be more music that'll
Yeah.
sound totally different, but is pulled from something from the past. And
Yeah.
it's
And
the same way
it's
in art. It's the same way
yeah,
in
and
whatever.
particularly in Magic, even over playing cards, like there's so much where something is a variation of what came before or building upon whatever came before. And it's so sort of interesting to see something where someone will take like there are a lot of classic effects that now have been updated for a smartphone. So, maybe someone was doing, well, like a good example, there's an old trick where you would take either a toothpick or a match and stick it through a little metal block, and there's been a few updated versions now where you're sticking something, a playing card or a butter knife or whatever, through an iPhone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so, same different thing. They just changed metal block for iPhone.
yeah.
And so, like, yeah, that's a derivative, but it's also new. And some of them may or may not have the same method as the classic one. But there's all kinds of, a cut and restored rope. Then people were doing cut and restored headphones when headphones still had cords on them.
And it's also like relevant to the time though too, because like you said, like how many
Yeah,
people these days are really using matchbooks?
right.
In 10 years, who knows if people are going to be using the people may still be using iPhones, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be using the iPhone SE version that the gimmick may have been created around now. And so
Sure.
there is always that capability for evolution with the times, which is great.
Yeah. Yep. But so yeah, I think what's important there also is when you're putting out the stuff to not only have done your due diligence, but to share crediting and to get permission where applicable. I mean,
Yeah.
some things obviously, a double lift, which is a particular move in Magic for the non-magician people out there, is considered public domain. Anyone can kind of use that without anything. But then there are specific moves where we know the history of whether it's a move or a gimmick or whatever. And in a lot of those cases, either the creator is still alive or the rights have been sold exclusively to a certain person or company. And so in those cases, like you have to get permission. And so, yeah, it becomes a weird thing also of like, I guess what percentage something has been changed
Yeah.
before it's like a whole new thing. So that had happened. My trick Cannibal that I put out ages ago is based on a really old plot from the 1950s called Cannibal Cards, where you have these 4 kings and you have 3 people choose a card, and all the 3 selected cards get eaten by the kings. And a bunch of people have played with this plot over the years in varying ways and different methods and stuff. And so I had seen a trick from Jay Sankey, and then I twisted that and changed it a little further and came up with a cannibal presentation on that. And I kind of talked through the history of the original plot and what I had seen Jay do, which his thing was inspired by another guy. And so tried to kind of give that whole story. And so then when I put it out, though, Jay reached out to us. We had done this as it
Thank
was
you,
me
C
and
Dub.
Blue
We
Crown.
appreciate the support, man.
Thank you, C Dub. We love you.
And So I had put that out with credit and everything, and so Jay messaged us, and Jay's a super nice guy, and he was like, "Hey," he's like, "some of my fans are like saying that you put out a thing that's similar to my thing, and I just wanted to see what's up." And so I
Nice.
sent him the whole download. I said, "Here you go," and he looked at it, and he's like, "Yeah, we're cool." He's like, "You changed it, you credited me and where it came from." He's like, "There's nothing wrong here." Um, so anyway, that's a whole
And
different thing.
that's what it really I feel like
Um,
should be, a collaborative environment. But
yeah.
getting on a similar topic, but not necessarily the same topic there. Talking about magic and you getting into in the '90s, who was really your kind of initial inspiration in the magic industry? What got you into magic?
What got me into magic in terms of performing was a Mark Wilson tape. So Mark Wilson, super unique. He had a regular show on television way back in the day called The Magical Land of Alakazam. And his
Nice.
book, his encyclopedia of magic, is highly regarded as one of sort of like the things that you must have in your library and is like a great starter book. So a lot of beginners over the years have started with Mark Wilson material in one way or another. And so, yeah, when I was 8 years old, my grandmother for Christmas, I think off of QVC, they were pitching this
Nice.
tape. So it was like a VHS tape that came with a booklet and an audio cassette tape. And it was this whole package. But
That's really
same as
cool.
like, it's like, what do you get an 8-year-old for Christmas? Chemistry set, magic kit, whatever. So this was sort of like a magic kit, but without the props. It was just instructional material. And so I watched that and learned everything that was on there. And, just was hooked. Like I was super into it because it had a little bit of card stuff, some money magic, some stuff with strings and rubber bands. It was just kind of a nice little eclectic mix of close up. So that's what got me into magic. And then from there, a couple of years later, my family took a trip for Christmas to Disney World in Orlando. And in Epcot, they have all the different countries. And so
Yeah.
in Japan at Epcot, they had a dealer for Tenyo Magic, which is a Japanese based magic company. And they
Such cool
make a lot
stuff.
of, yeah, such cool stuff, such clever mechanical methods. They're basically like mini stage illusions that you can do close up, but like
Yeah.
mechanical. So they don't take like sleight of hand or practice, generally speaking. But yeah, just really
Harrapin
cool
is
stuff.
huge into Tenya.
Nice. And yeah, so and they're still around. They release 4 or 5 new tricks every year, and it's sort of like, like the 2020 Tenyo lineup, the 2021 Tenyo lineup. They had teamed up. This was also in the mid to late 90s. There was a thing, I think it was a partnership with Milton Bradley, where they rebranded them as Magic Works on the US market. So you could go to Toys R Us or wherever and buy these Magic Works tricks that were Tenyo items.
That's really cool.
Um, and so I got into those for a while, and then it was my dad had always liked magic. He didn't do magic, but he liked it, and he was like, "Hey, like these things are great and all these sort of props and toys that you have, but if my parents would invite their friends over for dinner, and then afterwards they'd be like, oh, have the kids show you some magic tricks, and I'd have to like go to my room and get all my little toys and set them up and whatever, and then be like, okay, I am now ready to do this trick." And so my dad was like, "Hey, like it'd be cool if you could just do magic with anything, like if you could just like take any item or borrow something and do magic with it." And this idea was like totally foreign to me because I hadn't really like been to magic shows or anything. The only magic that was really around in the mass media at that time in a way was like the annual David Copperfield TV specials.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, yeah, good point, Dad. And so we looked right in the yellow pages. I'm going to make myself seem ancient here. Um,
The
is that,
website, not the website, the print version, right?
yeah, the fat book.
I miss
Books are
those
these
things.
things made of paper, kids. Uh,
They were always useful for getting up to the high cabinets you couldn't reach as a kid. So
exactly. And so we went and we found that there was a magic shop in Raleigh, which I grew up in Durham, so just one town over. And so went in there and kind of told them that I was like, hey, I have these Tenyo tricks and stuff, but like I want to learn more. Like I didn't even know to call it sleight of hand. And the shop there. And that's what's so great about brick and mortar shops. Nothing against the online purchasing experience. And I think the internet has brought us all kinds of stuff. But most people I run into now who are beginner magicians tell me that they've learned off of YouTube. And
Yeah.
there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with YouTube. YouTube is such a mixed bag, though, where you never know if the person teaching you is qualified and experienced and capable, or not.
Yeah.
Whereas in a magic shop, they know what's good for a beginner and what's not. They know what's outside your level, and they know kind of the classics and the fundamentals and where you should grow. So same thing, like I'm sure people have learned piano or guitar off of YouTube, and there's people who are great for that and will really guide you well. And other people probably like try and play Stairway to Heaven like with their first day with a guitar and fail miserably because they didn't start at the right place. Um, and so yeah, I went into the magic shop and he gave me Michael Amar's Easy to Master Card Miracles, which is great, and I still do tricks from that today.
That's
And
really cool.
a book by Bill Tarr called Now You See It, Now You Don't. Some basics in sleight of hand of, just a basic little take a thing, make it vanish kind of stuff. And then I just was hooked from there. I never stopped. I just got more and more into it. And so then, of course, as an offshoot from that, you're using trick decks of cards, and so you start encountering a Svengali deck or a stripper deck or a this or a that, or and so you wind up as a magician with a little bit of a card collection, no matter what, because you're
Yeah.
going to have several like standard decks that you just use to perform with, and then as you come across tricks where you need a duplicate card of something, or you're going to fold it or tear it or glue something together, like you just need extra cards. And then you start having some of these gaffed and gimmicked decks, and it just sort of goes from there. And
Nice.
then what didn't help with my collecting was, so when eBay started in the late 90s, so yeah, I've been on eBay since like 99. And man, let me tell you, so yeah, oh my God, I feel so ancient talking about this stuff. I don't feel old. Um,
You're
on
not old,
eBay,
man.
you
You're only
had
as
to
old as you
mail a
feel. That's the
check,
key.
right?
You have
So
to
you would
mail a
win an
check.
auction on eBay, you would mail a check to the
Oh my God.
seller, they would get the check, wait for it to clear, and then send you whatever thing you had bought. So I used to buy magic on eBay, but that's where I started collecting more sort of other unique stuff. Like you would find occasionally like a vintage deck or whatever. And so I didn't do that a lot. I didn't have a big budget, but that was sort of where my card collecting started, was as an offshoot of magic with some of the gaffed and gimmick decks. And then as eBay came in, there was better access to some of these other kind of cool older decks that you wouldn't otherwise just normally stumble across in the middle of North Carolina.
Yeah. And so how was that? Like you said, growing up in the Durham area, there was a magic shop by you.
Mhm.
When you started kind of getting more into it, did you ever felt that you had basically consumed everything you could from that resource? Or was it that you really just kind of grew with the shop as well?
Yeah, I mean, magic shops have a little bit of everything for everybody. So, I mean, they had stuff, whether you were a mentalist or a kids performer or a clown, they would sell the makeup and balloons and wigs and stuff. And they were also a costume shop. So, unfortunately, they closed a couple of years ago. They're not around anymore. But
That's a shame.
um, yeah, the place was called initially the Magic Corner, and the first location I went to mostly was costume shop and whatnot, and literally one corner of it was the magic counter. Um, but so yeah, no, I never felt that I had outgrown going to the magic shop. I still always like to pop in there when I could. Online, obviously, you have that much more access, and yeah, that many more things to find and follow. And so yeah, I would just kind of buy books and videos and individual tricks, kind of as they interested me. And I think for a long time, when you're starting in magic, it's good and you should explore a lot of everything. So you should work with coins and cards and ropes and silks and some close-ups and parlor, not necessarily stage. Obviously, some people get into stage real young, but most people obviously get into close-up because of convenient size, convenient prices, easy to work with. You're not spending thousands of dollars on some big illusion to saw somebody in half. A
Yeah.
deck of cards is $3, uh, and then
Not
you hit
anymore,
with
it isn't.
100 tricks. Yeah, not anymore. No, no, no.
I feel like that's the appeal though for
Um,
coin magic too, is like you can always find coins, readily
yes.
available. Maybe not gimmicked coins, but like you can always find a quarter or a handful of quarters and nickels and dimes somewhere to do a lot of like coin related beginner techniques.
Exactly. Yeah, and so same thing. Like that's where kind of my dad had pushed me on. He's like, "Yeah, what if anyone ever asks you, like, hey, can you do a trick?" And you don't have like your little plastic thing with you, then you're just like, "Nope, sorry." And so yeah, like I'll carry magic stuff on me. Not so much anymore. in terms of like specific gimmicks or anything. But between what's in my wallet, I always will have a couple of cards in my wallet that I can do something with. And there's phone-based things that you can do. And one thing I really love is a lot of the time when I go out, I'll just wear a couple of rubber bands on my wrist.
Yeah.
Because there's really great rubber band magic that you can do with 2 normal rubber bands, and they're just not in your way. They don't take up any space, and they cost a few bucks for a bag of a zillion of them.
Yeah.
That's gotten me through airports really well. When I go to Magic conventions and stuff, a lot of the time my bag is full of decks of cards and whatnot. And so if I have several bricks of cards in my carry-on bag, a lot of the time they pull it, because on an X-ray that just looks like some big solid mysterious thing.
Yeah.
And so, but obviously when you're going through security, you can't have anything in your pockets or any items or whatever. And then you can't touch your bag when they're reviewing it. So literally every single time I go through airport security, I have my 2 rubber bands on, though. So nothing else. I don't even have my shoes or whatever on, but I have my 2 rubber bands. And I've done just a quick one phase thing where 2 bands will penetrate through each other for the TSA agents. And it always makes my life go so much more smoothly. Like they then
funny.
just sort of light up a little more. They're much more friendly with me and whatnot. And so it gets me through there and onto my flight.
Now, do you do it while you're waiting for your bags, or before you walk through the metal detector, or when do you...
Only after. So I've walked through the metal detector, my bag has gone through, and they've seen something questionable, so it'll be there as they're opening it, and they're looking, and they're seeing, like, why would any normal person have dozens of decks of cards in their bag? Like they get one, like, why do you have 1,000 decks of cards in here?
He's a gambler. He's a gambler.
Right. And that's a lot of the time what people ask. They'll be like, oh, what are you, a poker player or something? And so I'm like, oh no, I'm actually going to this magician convention. And so then I'll just pull off the rubber bands real quick, pop, pop, pop. And they're like, oh, that's great. And then they say, okay, cool. Like, clearly this is not something dangerous. Zip it back up, and okay, have a good flight. So, yeah, super fun.
That's funny.
Dude,
so learn rubber band magic if you're into magic. Card tricks,
just
money,
they all help each other. They're all, if you learn coin magic, sleight of hand, it just allows you to be more
creative and flexible.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because you're always going to come across a pen or a coin or a balled up cocktail napkin, something that you can do something with.
Yeah.
And you mentioned cell phone magic too, which is such a tough and interesting industry these days too.
Sure. Yeah, and there's a zillion magic apps out there now, and I use some of them. I think the tricky thing is doing things, because people now know, like, because the phone in and of itself is magic already. Like, everything that it can do is already magical. So it's important, I think, if you're gonna do phone-based magic tricks, to do things that don't seem like an app. So if it's something that you can do on the audience's phone, where they know that you didn't like install some special app all of a sudden or whatnot. So it can be difficult. I think there are some where the obvious path from the spectator's mind to a solution is like, oh, it's an app. So yeah, I would say, there's obviously like super cool, great apps out there, but yeah, some are better and more deceptive than others.
Yeah, like some people are winning $1 million with them, on shows.
Right.
It's crazy. I think the cool thing is, though, too, as we see more apps develop, you actually see a collaborative effort with a lot of magicians who are kind of creating interconnectivity between apps, which I think is really cool. So you have that creative space between magicians who are showing their inherent respect for another magician by being like, hey, I saw your app. That's awesome. I'd love to be able to use my app and your app in conjunction and create even better stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's one area where it's just like, as much as I try and keep up, I know that I'm not, like, I know that I don't know whatever the very latest stuff is. I try, but yeah, there's just so much of it always coming out. And also, budget. Like, I wish I could buy every single thing that comes out that looks cool, but it's
pricey.
So that's where I rely on other people to say, like, oh no, this thing is awesome. Like, rather than buying $5 $20 things, go buy this $100 thing because it's worth it.
There's some really cool things out there that just surprise the crap out of me, and I'm just like, wow, how is that even possible? It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
crazy how people think of some of this stuff.
Right. And I love being fooled. Boy, oh boy, I still love being fooled so much.
Yeah.
And I think I think magicians are the best potential audience for magic. As long as they're not smug and being like, those guys who know three methods, and so like you do a trick and they're like, oh, you palmed it. And you're like, I didn't do anything that had anything to do with palming. But they know that that's a term associated with magic.
Right.
Not those guys. But yeah, there's just, and sometimes I'll stay away from learning a method intentionally. So I remember the first time I ever saw card manipulation was they had run in the 90s a series called World's Greatest Magic. I think there were 5 of them. And it was on like the Family Channel, or it may have been on ABC or one of the networks as well. But every year for a few years, there was World's Greatest Magic. And in World's Greatest Magic 2, they had on Jeff McBride, um, who is a terrific all-around performer. He does all kinds of stuff. He runs the Mystery School in Las Vegas. Really creative guy, and he had just come off of winning a bunch of stuff through the Magic Castle and whatnot for his mask routine. So he's into like kabuki theater and stuff, and so he has
That's
these
really
cool
cool.
masks. And so the first part of the routine was all this cool mask stuff, and then the second half of it was his card manipulation, where he's just like showing both sides of his hand and then pulling a zillion cards out of nowhere. And I was just like, what the hell is this? Because I was 10 or 12 years old, something like that. But even then, like at that age, I didn't seek it out. Like it was just so impressive to me and seemed so impossible. I was like, yeah, you know what? Like, I don't want to know that one yet. And then it was in 2000, I was at the IBM convention in Buffalo. It was my first, like, well, not my first big convention, it was my first magic convention. And there was a guy in one part of one of the rooms doing just single card productions. And I asked him, I was like, okay, yeah, like I've seen on World's Greatest Magic and stuff. I'm like, where do you learn this? Like it had been 3 years at that point, and so I was ready to have the curtain pulled back. And the guy told me, he said, oh, Jeff McBride put out a series of tapes called The Art of Card Manipulation. He said, get those and watch those. And that's like everything you need to know. And so
That's really
at
cool.
that convention, someone in the dealer room had The Art of Card Manipulation. And so I was like, yes, please. Thank you very much. And
That's cool.
started learning that stuff. And so now you watch it in a different light, now you
Yeah.
know the various techniques and things. But you can still appreciate the skill that goes into it. So not that I dislike stage magic, especially Lance Burton and David Copperfield and these guys who were really at the top of the field. But if I'm going to watch stage stuff, I think my favorite is Manipulation X, whether it's cards or otherwise, but just watching this sleight of hand based stage magic where like the level of perfection and skill and everything that goes into it is just like crazy.
Yeah, it's next level.
Knowing how, and this is why I'm so blown away by Shin all the time, is like knowing how something's done and watching it and still being like, how do you do that? But
right.
But at the same time, you're like, I don't understand. I know, but I don't see it. How is it possible that it's crazy?
Right? Yeah, totally. And same thing, like I liken magic to movies in that way, because for me, like, yeah, like knowing how it's done doesn't destroy the entertainment, like I
Right.
know when I'm watching Jurassic Park that they didn't really have dinosaurs there, and I know the DeLorean didn't actually go back to 1955, and I love watching the behind the scenes features and stuff. Sorry to
What do you
break it
mean
to you,
it
Steve. No, they did. They took the whole crew. They had a bunch of time machines. They went back to 1955. They filmed it there.
I love
it. But so yeah, I think it's the same. It's that suspension of disbelief. You watch a movie and you're fine with it. You know that this is Michael J. Fox, not Marty McFly, but you're okay with that. You buy into it, you enjoy it, and you don't walk out with a negative attitude being like, yeah, it's just actors. It's just special effects. Like it was still like it's great. And so same, yeah, when people are dismissive of magic, I guess I don't understand that mindset. Because yes, there are charlatans out there who are, especially kind of in the psychic world, where they're like, I'm gonna contact your dead relative and please give me money and I will tell you things that are gonna make you feel better about your recent loss. Those people are scumbags.
Yeah.
But when it comes to just like a magic show, most magicians are being honest that they're like, hey, I'm presenting sleight of hand and illusions and psychology that look like magic. And so, yeah, it's funny to me if people are just like, meh, he hit it over here. It's like, well, yeah,
Yeah,
like,
it's
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 not
so
real.
it's funny because I mean, even in social media, you have people that are commenting underneath posts that are like, "Oh, you bombed it," or "Oh, that was a double lift," or whatever. And
Yeah,
it's like, just you have to
yeah,
ruin it. And I think it's to make themselves look like the cool person.
yeah.
Like
They
I
they
know how
feel
you did it.
smarter. Yeah, you
So
didn't fool me. I'm not stupid, kind of
right,
thing. And some of that, it depends on the performer. Some people just post magic and it's great. I have seen some people where they'll post it intentionally, kind of as a challenge. They'll present it more as a puzzle, and they'll be like, "Can you figure this out?" And in that case, I'm like, well, now, yeah, you're inviting people to comment and be like, you did this or that or
right.
whatever thing. So, yeah, I think as long as it's presented in the right way and you're not trying to challenge people, you're just trying to like show them something cool, then yeah, then the people who are popping up and being like, oh, well, he did this, then that, then whatever. I'm just like, come on,
Yeah.
come on.
That's why I always love when people have these little acts for the hecklers, you know. Like I remember Chris Ramsey put out a video, of course,
Mhm.
put out a video on how he deals with hecklers, and he does a trick specifically for them
Yeah.
where he'll show them a card and then he'll like I don't even remember if he palms something or does a pass and then shows everybody else the card, but a different card. So it
Yeah.
makes the heckler look like an idiot because everyone else saw a different card than that one person saw.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think those are
Yeah.
some fun tricks. You know, you do it really slow so they kind of see what it is, and then at the end it's totally not that, and they're like
Yeah.
looking
And a lot
stupid.
of the time in person, because I don't perform a lot. I wouldn't say that I'm a professional performer, but I'll say I've performed semi-professionally. And I got a lot of road time. When I was living in New York, I worked at FAO Schwartz for about a year and a
Oh,
half.
cool.
Nice.
And so, like, when you're demoing there for an 8-hour day, like, you get a lot of reps in on the same trick. And so you
Yeah.
kind of learn what starts to hit. And it also was a really good but really fun challenge because there would be so many international visitors. Like, there's so many people coming to Manhattan from all over the world, and they wanted to see this iconic toy store. And so they'd come in and not speak any English. And so then you're figuring out, like, luckily magic is such a visual thing that you can have nonverbal communication. You don't have to say hold out your hand and open it. You can just go like this and people understand it.
Yeah.
um
Like they might think, give
but
me money, maybe.
yeah, right, pay me now for this magic trick. uh but yeah, you get those moments of people who don't want to cooperate. If you're there and you're like, oh, put your card back in the middle, or just pick a card, and they're like, well, I want the top one or the bottom one or whatever. They're not really generally trying to be like jerks or try and mess you up or anything. I think they just want to kind of be part of the show. And so I think if you
Yeah.
give them a right amount of good attention, like, you can't let them take everything over and then be part of the whole rest of the show or whatever it's going to be. But if you give them that moment of attention instead of just ignoring them or brushing them off, and make them feel seen and special and like they had kind of their moment in the show, then they tend to be a lot more like well behaved after.
Yeah.
um
Dude, that's
yeah.
amazing that you were at FAO Schwartz performing. But the question that everybody wants to know is
Uh-huh.
did you hang out with the big teddy bear they had there?
There's lots of big teddy bears.
Yeah,
It
but they
was such
have
a
a
cool store to be in.
humongous one there. I don't know if they
Yeah.
still have it, but they always had a
I don't,
I
huge
mean, they shut down a
stuffed
couple years ago, so I
yeah,
don't, yeah.
they
they
always
shut
had a
down.
humongous stuffed animal,
Yeah,
like
and
20,
always at
30 foot
Christmas.
stuffed animal. Yeah.
Christmas was
Yeah.
super fun. Like the greeters at the door would be dressed as the wooden soldier
Mm,
nutcrackers and all that. So yeah, it was a super cool store to be in, and to be sort of part of that process and that history and lineage and whatnot.
that's
That's
cool.
really cool.
Yeah, my favorite stories there. This was a fun one. So I'm there in my little magic section doing my thing, and it wasn't a particularly busy day or moment. And this couple comes and they're kind of looking at the wall of kits and tricks and whatnot. And so I start walking up to them, and they look like a little defensive at first as I'm approaching them. And I'm like, okay, some people don't like salespeople, whatever. And so I'm like, hey, how you doing? Are you shopping for anybody in particular today? And the lady goes, oh, I'm just wondering what kind of cool, fun, magic-y things you have. And I'm like, oh, like for someone in particular, like, because usually people are for a kid or nephew or whatever. Um, and she goes, for me. And I
That's
go,
awesome.
oh, okay, because she's an adult woman. And so I'm like, great. And so I grab a couple things that I think would be good. And I'm like, let's come back over to my little table here. And so I'm just, showing her tricks and stuff. And as I'm interacting with them, I'm seeing people go by and giving them looks, and I'm just like, I'm noticing that something is up. I'm like, huh. And so I'm like, this is weird. And then one of the store's personal shoppers comes up, because that was an option. Someone could call and have a personal shopper kind of walk them through the store and whatnot. But usually that also would happen with sort of like high-end clients.
Yeah.
And so the guy, who's a very tall dude, was talking to the personal shopper, and I'm like, And so then a couple of people come up to him and they say, "Oh, congratulations, on MVP. We're such big fans, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, this makes sense. He's some sort of famous athlete, and I don't follow sports." So I'm like, that makes sense. I don't know who he is. This is just like his pretty wife or whatever. And so, like, gotcha. He's an athlete. And so, still just working with her. She bought a few tricks. They say, "Thanks, have a nice day. See you later." Okay, good. And so then after they leave, a couple of my coworkers come up and they're like, "Oh my God, Kevin, you were so calm. Like, how were you not like starstruck or anything?" And I'm like, "I don't know who they were." And they look at me like I'm from another planet. And they said, "It was Eva Longoria and Tony Parker."
Oh my
that's
God, dude, that is funny. That is so funny.
That's funny.
Yeah. My other big fun encounter there was
I probably wouldn't know who
you would
Dallas
kind of
was
gather
if
a
they
show.
weren't.
You would do a short show a lot of the time rather than individual tricks, depending on how crowded the store was. And so, but usually you'd draw a little crowd and you would do a short 5-minute show or something, do a bunch of tricks, and then be like, "Hey, everything I just performed is for sale. It's all easy. A 5-year-old could do it. Comes with video instructions, blah, blah, blah." And so I'm going through the show and you're trying to kind of look over here, look over there, interact with the little crowd that you have. And I see, I've got like 3 rows of people, and standing way further back behind everyone else, I look off and there's Spike Lee.
Oh,
And as
that's
far as I
dope.
know, Spike lives in New York, and so it's just kind of like, huh, like that's surprising that he would stop and like watch this toy store magic show, and then keep looking. And then right in the front row, right in front of me, I look down and there's like 3 foot tall mini Spike, and
That's
so is
funny.
his son. And he just was like super
Mini
excited
Spike.
and into it and whatnot. And so yeah, I wrapped up my show and they stayed, and he got the little magic kit and whatnot. But yeah, that was kind of cool and fun. That was one of the more fun things in general about the time that I lived in New York, because uh, FAO was my side gig. I would kind of do that on the weekends, and my day job was as a technical writer for B&H Photo, which is a
Oh,
huge
dope.
camera video store. And so I worked right in Midtown Manhattan, right by Penn Station, Madison Square Garden, and whatnot. And you would have the same thing. Celebrities would come through the store at B&H or whatever, and so people would be buzzing. You'd hear everyone else talking. "Daniel Craig's in the store today," or whatever sort of thing. So not a lot of actual like interactions or encounters or whatnot, but you'd see glimpses sometimes. Be like, "Oh, there
Very
went Larry
cool.
King."
Dude, how cool was it to
It
have
was
all the
fun.
Jewish holidays off?
That was fun. We didn't always, though, then get all the other calendar holidays
I
off.
know.
So
Well,
we
that's
would get off Christmas and New Year's, but there would be like Labor Day, the city would be empty. You'd take the train in and like, be like, "Where is everybody? It's a ghost town." And then you remember, oh, it's Labor Day, nobody's here. But no, yeah, it was
that's the
awesome
funny
having
thing
all the
about
Jewish
H
holidays off.
is like they do all the action, like the Jewish holidays, because Jewish people
Mhm.
literally run that whole entire company, and it's
Yeah,
like
the whole company is all Hasidic Jews.
it's
Yeah, very
hilarious.
Orthodox.
But
Yeah.
it's funny because everybody else takes all the other holidays off, and here's this one big company that even their online shop is down during Jewish holidays.
That's funny.
Yeah, even just
So
the
funny.
weekend, even just for Sabbath.
Yeah,
You can't
it's
shop on the
so
website.
funny.
Yeah.
Good on them. Good on them for sticking to it. I think in this
Right.
day and age,
Yeah.
so many people sacrifice things for business. It's exciting to see people still sticking with it when they want to. So
Exactly. Yeah. And the store is incredible. If anyone's into
Oh,
like
it's
photo,
huge.
video, audio stuff, if you're ever in Manhattan, go to B&H. I haven't worked there for many, many years now, but it's just a cool, fun toy store experience to go in there, and it's like
that's really cool.
Wonderland. Yeah.
You know what's so cool is the way that they have it's just the process that they do with everything. Their streamlined process is brilliant. The
Yeah.
fact that they have just conveyor belts and the different things and the way it's all the packages are retrieved. They've been doing that for
Yeah.
years before anybody else.
Yeah, and that's like one of the parts of the site. So for those who don't know, so if you go to B&H, you don't shop in a normal way. You don't go with like a basket or a cart or something and kind of be like, oh, I need this thing and that thing. As you're going through the store and you work with the employees and you say, oh yeah, I want this digital camera. They take it and they put it in a bin and they'll kind of print out a recurring ticket. So if you've gotten other items, you hand them your ticket. They add this new item to it and it all gets collated, but it all zips off. It's like freaking Willy Wonka. They put your thing in a basket that then whizzes off on a conveyor belt. You can look up in the store and see all these things traversing back and forth. Um, and then when you go to checkout, you just like give them your ticket with your number, and then they have like all your items there, and they're like, "Oh, here you go." So one, it's nice because you're not carrying everything around with you. But then yeah, it's just so like cool and kind of automated and efficient. It's wild.
And
That's
there's a
really cool.
gazillion people working there.
Yeah, it's humongous.
Yeah.
It's a really
There's
big.
literally a
store. Yeah.
gazillion people working there.
That's so cool. And so we talked a lot about your kind of background in Magic here, Kevin. We talked a little bit about your history with House of Playing Cards there, but what really, obviously one of the things I put in the description here is I want to start calling you the Maestro of Marked Cards here, because I feel like out of
I'll
anyone
take it.
out there, there you go. Out of anyone out there, I think there's some great marked card experts out there who are phenomenal at designing marked cards or have built great marking systems. But I
Like
think
Alex Pandrea?
well, and that's the interesting thing about it is, I feel like you've got this historical view of playing cards and marked playing cards, especially, that really gives you much deeper of a knowledge in this area. What kind of originally got you into marked cards?
Just I think again the general interest in Magic, and so the first place that I really ever encountered let's see, so these two sections of books, not this third one on the black shelf, but the first two on the gray ones, are all just basically marked card books.
Right.
Awesome.
But so let's grab these. We'll do some show and tell. So this one, Marked for Life by Kirk Charles. It was put out by Hermetic Press in the 90s. And so I don't know if I had just happened to go to the magic shop around the time that this was a newish title. And I just kind of saw it, or the guy recommended it or something. But there's some history and an info about the different types of marked decks and whatnot. But I mean, as a magician, it's a super powerful tool to know what card someone has chosen, and they feel like there's zero chance that they could know. So you just like the first time you perform a trick with a marked deck, as basic as it can be, you're like, oh man, this is like the ultimate secret weapon. So you just feel like you've been given this like superpower because they're very easy to use. And so this I got into. I think one that's a little easier to find is this one, Hidden in Plain Sight. They are the same book, but Hidden in Plain Sight has an extra chapter. So this one was put out when Boris Wilde put out his mark deck, the Boris Wilde mark deck. And so there's a chapter in here about Boris's deck that is not in this one, but otherwise the content is the same. So if you go hit eBay or used bookstores or whatever, look for either or, get whichever one you can. But I think Hidden in Plain Sight is not only a little easier to find, but there's a little more content. But they both have a really great, thorough bibliography, which is nice if it's something that you really want to dive into. But so that's how I got into it. Was I got this book and started playing with that, because at that time there were really no good factory mark decks. So Boris put out his bicycle factory mark deck in 2005. Prior to that, there were no marked factory bicycle decks. Like if you wanted a marked bicycle deck, you had to mark it. There were other ones on the market, like in Magic Kits, or the Deland deck is kind of the famous one, the automatic deck or the dollar deck. It goes by many names. So yeah, I don't know why I got more and more into it. It just was, I guess, in a way, a really good combination of my various interests. So obviously it encompasses the magic stuff. It encompasses card collecting and card design, because there's so many ways, depending on the design of the deck, that you can mark a deck. Like the oldest marking systems were tactile. They would put a little bump or a nick or something in there. And then as you went on, they would put just some sort of smudge or whatever on there, and then into more and more sophisticated ones, which the ones that they have today that are like technologically based, because you have cards now that have RFID in them, or they'll have barcodes along the side that are readable by cameras that are 100 feet away, and all kinds of crazy stuff, things that can only be seen with special inks through special lenses. Um, and I haven't really dived too much into those myself, obviously, because of budget more than anything else.
Yeah.
But even just with sort of the low tech analog ones, we're in kind of like a really nice boom for marked cards right now as well. Just in the last few years, I see more and more marked deck Kickstarters coming up, and people getting really creative with how they can approach it, because you really have sort of now two main ways of marking decks. You have coded marked decks that you have to kind of learn and be deciphered, that there'll be extra dots, or there's one thing that's pointy and one thing that's round on there, or whatever. So things that you can see, but even if you can see them, you can't read them unless
Right.
you know the secret. And then you have what I would call openly readable marked decks. So things like the Marked Maidens that we put out at Penguin, where you just look at it and you see a letter A and a spade shape. And so whether
Yeah.
you've been taught it or not, once you see it, oh, this is clearly the Ace of Spades.
Right.
So yeah, it's those two types of decks. But even one guy, Sebastian from down in Florida, put out Midnight playing cards on Kickstarter recently, and his system was really clever because it was kind of a hybrid system. So he has an openly readable value, but then a coded suit. And I think there are probably a couple other decks that have done something similar, but not very many that I'm aware of, and certainly none recent or mainstream. So it's cool to see that. Or like 11th Hour that Emily put out on Kickstarter. It was designed by Destino.
Destino, yeah.
Yeah.
Theirs was a clock-based marking system, and so clock-based or dial-based systems are super old. They go back well over 100 years, to where you would have, a circle element on the design, and it kind of works like a clock. You have those 12 positions, and so if something's pointing at the 3 o'clock position, it's a 3. But they didn't do that on 11th Hour. So they have a clock on there, and the obvious thing would be to treat it like all the other clock decks that have been around for 100 plus years. But they came up with a different, really kind of clever way to do it. So I really appreciate kind of, that thought that goes into marked decks now, especially factory printed marked decks that are also being incorporated with custom designs.
Yeah. Now, do you think
So,
it's? I mean, because I've seen some mark decks come out that
Mhm.
are literally collector's decks that aren't
Mhm.
for Magic or. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's?
That's great.
Yeah.
I think nobody is a stranger to the concept of marked decks. So, like,
Right.
within the lay public, like the concept that these exist,
Yeah.
like people know that. Like, they've been in movies, they've bought them in whatever Magic kits that are sold in toy stores all over the place. Um, yeah, being caught out, like, people may or may not suspect that you're using a marked deck when you actually perform Magic. But depending on how confidently you handle the cards, if you're being suspicious with it, and then they pick a card and you're like, did you have the 8 of Hearts? Then they're gonna be like, I think he used a marked deck. But if you're
That'd be
using
me
it
because
more
I'm blind as
wisely
a
than
bat.
that,
I'd be like, well, I'm not blind as a bat, obviously, but
yeah.
I'd be doing that.
Steve has a tough time with marked decks for sure.
Yeah. At least
Well,
so here's the thing.
I-
At least I can see them when I actually look at them. It's just the
Yeah.
distance. There's a couple that I'm like, okay, I know it's mocked. I know the system. Still can't see it.
Yeah. So yeah, you maybe need a tactile mark deck. You need something that has like braille on it.
Yeah.
But that, or I think I had recommended to you on a past talk the it's put out by Phoenix, which is a German brand, but they print a lot of their decks with USPC. It's called
Yeah.
the Daredevil deck by Henry Evans. And its markings are humongous because it's intended to be used in like a more parlor or stage type situation than close up.
Yeah.
And so I bet you could read those marks, Steve.
I can read the
because
butterfly.
they're
I
like
like the
an
butterfly
inch or
mocking
more
system.
tall. Yeah.
The butterfly mocking system's awesome, and I can read that.
Yeah. And butterflies, and well, so that's funny, like to loop things back around to like talking about being inspired and creating like kind of like spin-off alterations of work that's come prior, is like a lot of what Andre did with butterflies was take old concepts but execute them in a really nice way with beautiful design. But also, like, he gave credit. Like, so you had this guy Jeff Busby had put out a book years and years ago called Secret of the Palmettos, where he used those palmetto Texans to do like edgemark work. And that's even that, like, edgemark work was around way before that, but that's sort of kind of put it in a more modern, popular context. Excuse me. And so Andre had come across that, but then, yeah, applied these ideas in new ways and brought other stuff to it. And yeah, again, like, made a beautiful deck of cards, like, you know, where he didn't have to sacrifice any design in order to put this functionality in as well. Because you do see that sometimes with some heavily marked decks. So like some of the early Deland decks are no doubt clever because they have thousands of markings in them. But they're not very usable. So here, I'll grab a deck.
They're not usable.
So.
Yeah, the Deland decks are a little bit
Yeah, this one's not original, but it's an old one. So this was originally marketed as Deland's dollar deck, but then it's also been marketed as automatic cards or as Deland's $100 deck. They've been printed by multiple printers over the years.
Such a cool
this is what
design.
it looks like. And so you have all 4 of these corners are telling you information, but then each of these dials is telling you information as well.
I love how detailed the Deland's decks get. Yeah,
Deland lived in the early 1900s that he was putting these out. These came out in 1913. Again, not this specific printing, but they're so small. So there's over 12,000 marks in this deck.
What?
And it's stacked, but they're so small that it becomes more or less useless. Like, you can easily use these corner ones. Like, they're pretty useful, but they give you limited information compared to all this middle stuff. But man, this middle stuff, is just not practical for like any real human to use in a performance.
Yeah.
But then that's where it's been cool that in modern day you have Houdini's Magic put out a thing called the Gambler's Marked Deck a bunch of years ago that sort of takes some of these ideas of a heavily marked stacked deck and put them in a much more readable fashion. And then you also got that with the Code that Andy Nyman put out through Theory 11 a bunch of years ago, and the Marksman deck that Luke Germain put out with Vanishing Ink. And so you have these 3 different decks. Oh, and Roy Johnson, who put out the Setup Marked deck, and his current one is available through Phoenix. But so all these ones, and there's other marked stack decks out there as well, but these are kind of like some of the more known ones. And they're using these principles that are well over 100 years old, but they're either putting a new spin on it or adding even more information that's useful for the particular routines that these magicians are coming up with. But they're also making them way easier to read. Like, so the Marksman, has as much info as the Deland deck, maybe not quite as much, but a ton. But it's like actually usable. Like, you could go out and use every piece of information, as opposed to this one where it's super impressive to think that someone back, pre-digital technology had to make all the printing plates for all these individual marks and like not get them wrong.
That's crazy.
So from a historical standpoint, it's fantastic, but from a practical, like, performing standpoint, not so much.
Now, how many mock decks do you have? Not that you've created or been involved in.
Right. How many do I own in my collection?
How many do you own in your collection?
A few hundred, somewhere between 200, 250, something like that, I would say. I don't have an exact count on them, but somewhere in there.
Do you try to buy one of every one, or?
Yeah, nowadays with the custom market, especially because there are so many new decks coming out all the time, and you have to kind of corral yourself in terms of budget and space.
Yeah,
that's kind of where I've chosen to generally. So I'll buy decks that I don't even like because they're marked. Like, it's a design that I think is maybe kind of ugly, but I'm like, oh, but they're marked, so I have to have them.
Kev, there's no ugly decks, Kevin. They're just not your style.
That's true. To somebody, the deck is beautiful. It just may not be to me. And that's fine. I'm sure I've put out decks that other people are like, that's dumb. And that's fine. Like, that's the beauty of the world that we're in with playing cards, is that there's something for everybody, and no particular deck should appeal to everybody. I firmly believe that. But yeah, decks that I would otherwise not necessarily find intriguing, I'll buy simply because they're marked.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like then that makes my collection that much more interesting and special to me, and that much
Nice.
more manageable and whatnot. Because I would love to buy just every deck out there that I think is cool or beautiful or whatnot, but I just can't, nor can anybody. So that's where I think we start seeing just a lot more people being selective about what they are and aren't buying. So
You have to
we'll
be at
see.
some point in your collection. You have to be, and even like
Sure.
you said, breaking it down into a niche of the collection for you, marked decks. Even there's still so many marked decks, more so coming out now than 10 years ago, than 100 years ago. It's difficult.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. Like in my kind of early days in Magic, the big thing that you would see people talking about was Ted Leslie. He's a German magician and mentalist, and he kind of pioneered the use of rub-on transfers onto cards. But so even that would be a lot of work. You had to take these little stick-on transfers and burnish them onto the cards. But he came out with that in like the mid '80s, and then Boris's system originally built on that and was a derivation of that. And then he got his factory printed. And then once companies were factory printing marked cards, but even factory printed marked cards aren't a new thing. In the 1800s, there were plenty of card factories printing marked decks. And then they went away for a while. And sort of in the first part of the 20th century, you had like lots of hand marked decks. And then you could get these gambling supply catalogs. You see ads for them. These gambling supply houses that would sell cards and dice and various gaming apparatus would also sell cheating apparatus. And so
Yeah.
you can still pull up these old ads where they'll show a dozen or more different back designs, and they'll be like, hey, we'll do hand painted marked work for you on whatever, rider back, fan back, circle back, any sort of thing. And you could buy these decks even then for like a buck or two, which now would be $50 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so yes, it's kind of following like the history of marked cards is so interesting in how it goes hand in hand with the history of playing cards themselves. Um, so yeah, for me, it's just sort of a cool niche to be in, is as because likewise with Magic or modern card collecting, um, with all the vintage and antique decks that are out there, and just with all the information, like I like sort of the history of all playing cards worldwide, but much more of my focus is on American card making, and then specifically on like marked cards, just because I can't know everything about all the French and German and Spanish and whatever other playing cards. So
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to
Um,
keep up with the cards here, never mind in another country.
exactly, yeah, and we're at such a boom now, and I'm as excited and eager as anyone else to see where everything's gonna go, because like we've been in such a period of growth and innovation for the last 15 years that people say that we're in a bubble and that it's going to burst and all this sort of thing. And yeah, I think in some ways that's true, and obviously people will fall in and out of the hobby, same as with Magic. People get into Magic as a kid, they do it until they're a teenager, and then they move on to other things. And so I'm sure there are people who kind of get into cards, then they get out of it, and then a few years later they get back into it. um but I mean, like, I think there's so much room for growth. You look at this 1000 campaign that just cracked $2 million.
yeah.
And I mean, I think the vast majority of his backers, this was their first Kickstarter ever that they had backed. And so I don't expect many of those people to get into card collecting, but I have to think that at least some of them will. So like, as long as cool decks keep being put out there, it's like we can get jaded as we've been collecting for 5, 10, 20 years. Um, but, there's people who bought their first deck today. And so they're going to dive in on all the things that we take for granted that have happened over the last decade because we watched it unfold live. They got to go back and research that and find out, who is Ito and who's Randy and who's Alex Chin and Lautrec and, whoever else, Jackson.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. It's like it'll be interesting to see the growth in the community, because it's kind of like a revolving door. Someone just bought their
Yeah.
new deck, but another person just sold their collection.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, it's interesting to
Mhm.
see.
Totally. And
Yeah.
that's where I think clubs like 52 Plus Joker are so important, because I think they really help to connect all the different subsets. So it's funny how many parallels between Magic and card collecting there are, beyond just the fact that like a lot of magicians do card tricks.
Right.
Because like in Magic, you have so many subsections. You have people who do big stage illusions, or they're mentalists, or they only do close-up card magic, or only coins, or they have a specialty. You know, they do kid shows, they do whatever. And so same in cards. You know, you wouldn't think about it kind of on the outside. You'd be like, oh, cards are cards. But then you have people who collect only singles, or only Kings of Diamonds, or only antique, only vintage, only modern, only bicycle, only a particular artist. There was a guy.
Only bicycle gets to be expansive too. That's a tough one.
Yeah, that one. I mean, there's however many thousands of bicycle decks. Like that's a pretty big
Yeah.
niche to focus on.
And a lot of them are ugly.
Now, Steve, every day is beautiful.
You know what? I'm okay to say a lot of them are ugly.
Oh man. But so yeah, it's cool then to go to things like the 52 plus Joker convention, but even beyond that, just to get either the monthly digital publication or the quarterly print one, because you have these people who have focused on some other sub thing. So there's plenty of people who have never looked at or given a second thought to mark cards, where I've spent like hours flipping through old books trying to find stuff about them. But you know, someone else has spent all their time looking at all the different, like specifically Coca-Cola cards. And I'm going to forget his name, but at the convention a few years ago, one of the members gave a presentation on Coca-Cola cards.
I
And it
remember
was
that, yeah.
fascinating. And it was something that I had never thought about before, but like he is an expert in that. And so being in the club kind of helps people connect over these different areas of specialization where they can share that with each other. And, you know, at a service level where you're like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, let me tell you a little bit about mark cards. And they're like, oh, well, let me tell you about, you know, bridge sets from 1890. And I'm like, cool. I don't know a thing about that. Yeah. But yeah, so it's just such a cool thing that that so many people can be into for so many different reasons, and they can have meaning to them for it's so many different reasons.
Yeah. It's interesting to see
Yeah.
like who picks up on what, you know.
Right.
I guess.
Because yeah, there are going to be people, you know, where their first deck is a mint deck or a Ramsey deck or something like that. You know, some of these guys who have a big YouTube following that then wind up having a big Kickstarter as well.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't go into any further decks than that. Like they just want that one because they're a fan of that creator, and that's cool. But yeah, you never know then when one of them is gonna like be like, oh yeah, well the first few decks I got were these cool modern Kickstarter ones, but then I discovered some other thing, and then they wind up becoming the next Congress guy, you know, where they're just like super focused on one particular thing. Yeah.
That's
Oh yeah, and to everyone, I don't mean like an actual congressman. I mean Kevin
Congress
Sini
decks,
is now
yeah,
the
Kevin
Congress
Sini,
guy,
yeah.
Congress branded playing cards.
Dude, it's
I have to
interesting,
try
though.
and check myself and know that not everyone watching knows the same things and people that I do.
But it is interesting, really, how those niches kind of work their way out, because I think a lot of people do get introduced to the community via the same, you know, few dozen different channels, you know, and not channels. I don't mean like YouTube channels. I mean like avenues to
Sure.
get into playing cards, whether it be Theory 11 or, you know, something through Magic, whether it be Mark decks or whatever, something they pick up from Penguin or somewhere else, you know, something they even see in the store. Like there's these finite, I want to say there's a finite amount of avenues to get into it. But like you said, yeah, it just branches out into thousands of different ways that people curate their collection, which is awesome.
For sure. Yeah, I would say that most people who have like started in like the card collecting hobby in the last 5 years, if you ask them how they got into collecting cards, the answers probably don't have a lot of diversity. But if you go, let's say you took 10 random people and asked them, you know, maybe you only have 3 answers amongst those 10 people of how they got into it.
Yeah.
But 10 years from now, if you ask those same 10 people, like, hey, what are you doing now with cards? You're going to get wildly different answers from all 10 of them.
Yeah.
Because some are probably not going to be into it at all anymore. And
Yeah.
others, have probably gone off and been like, oh, yeah, now I focus just on this sort of thing. And some of them may have wound up, you know, designing and producing their own deck of cards. And
I'd like
you
to
just
know
never
how
know.
many people got into cards because of Chris Ramsey. That's what I want to know.
Probably a good handful, yeah, and
Yeah,
same thing, like, a lot of people I know have gotten into Magic because of him or Pandrea or,
yeah.
yeah, any of these bigger YouTube guys where they're like, "Hey, yeah, I found this," and a lot don't, but, like, my
Dude, it's
cat's
interesting
joining
too.
us.
It's interesting too because I do think you have that whole aspect of, like you said, supporting just the creator there, and you never come back into it again.
Mhm.
But you do now see people who are inadvertently becoming collectors because of Chris Ramsey continuing to come out with decks, and they want to continue to support that. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy. I also think there's also this other interesting avenue of the collector space now too, which is always, I think, always been there, but I think is really blowing up even more so now, is the speculative aspect of it. You
yeah,
see a lot of people getting into it, being like, "Oh man, I can go buy these cards and then flip them for twice the amount in six
sure.
months." And so, they don't necessarily have the interest in cards, but they see it as a monetary thing. And I think that's almost like we went through a bit of a bubble there for a while, and it's almost kind of popped at this point, I think, which is finally good. But
Yeah, I think that's a lot more unpredictable now. There was a thing, like I mentioned, I used to be able to buy a brick of pretty much any custom deck that came out, and for a while there, it was almost guaranteed that any of those would wind up being worth more later. And I
yeah,
wasn't buying them particularly with the thought of reselling. It was just usually a brick was, you would get a good rate. They'd sell them for 10% off if you bought a brick instead of buying a single. Um, and then yeah, you'd sit on them for a couple of years and then find like someone's like, oh, I'm looking for a whatever deck, and you're like, oh, I've got spares of that. Cool, yeah, I can sell it for 2 3 times what I bought it for. And then certain brands and designs, certainly David Blaine ones for a while. I mean, like his original, not the very very first Tally Ho styled split spades, but the first split spades that he put out with Theory 11.
yeah,
One of my favorite designs ever. Actually, that's this one. That's the marked one of the split spades.
that's really cool.
Um, it they wound up going for crazy money, and like I had bought them when they first came out. They were like $6 or $7, and then I had bought a bunch just because I really liked them and I was gonna use them, and they were cool. And then you start selling them off, and then same thing, white lions, and then gator backs and whatever. I remember I had bought again. Yeah, you buy a brick just because you like them, and you're like, cool discount. And I think the first 2 or 3 colors in particular of Gatorbacks, it didn't take all that long before they were worth way more. And so I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, like I'll sell these now for $60 a deck. And then you kick yourself because a few years later, now you're like, oh man, those first few colors of Gatorbacks go for even way more than that now.
Yeah,
But it's like with Beanie Babies, like you never know when that's gonna pop with a particular brand or design or
hundred
whatever,
percent.
because it ebbs and flows. Like certain things that would have gone for like a couple $100 10 years ago, now it's a whole new group of people who are hyped and focused on other hot new brands and designers. And so they're like, oh, I don't really care about that thing. So it's like, yeah, those are still maybe worth more than they were at retail, but so yeah, buying purely for speculative reasons, I think is risky, and there are other much more surefire ways to make a return on your money if that's what you want to do. So
Dude, no doubt
yeah,
about
there
that.
are certain brands and artists I think where it's a lot more likely. It's pretty difficult, I think, to get a low trek deck that's not going to go up in value. But yeah, just my interests have gone away from that. We've had that low trek came to 52 plus Joker and dropped a new release there that was like $100, and part of me is like, man, I could easily buy this for 100 today and sell it for 200 tomorrow. But I was just like, nah, I don't really want to do that. I'm like, I would rather that someone who really wants that in their collection be able to buy it from him and have it in their collection. So it's like,
Yeah,
I'm trying to just buy stuff that I actually want to hang on to.
yeah.
But
I
that's
think
me. And yeah, nothing wrong. No judgment against people who are buying to speculate, but it's such an unknown thing. Like
look,
I kind of feel bad for someone who then goes and buys 3 bricks of something that, doesn't go up in value.
Yeah.
Lautrec just came in. Look who just peeped in. He goes,
Oh,
"Watch what you're
really? That's so
saying."
funny.
What's up, Lotrek? How you
His
doing,
his
man?
ears were burning.
I
That's
love it.
hilarious.
Oh my god.
Um, yeah, it's funny because it's like I think the market is in a really weird place right now. For a lot of these brands that people were buying and just selling. And I think that's let's take Fontaine and Anyone and those big hype brands, and I think a lot of those companies um
Yeah.
a lot of the people were just buying them to sell them. And that's why they were
Sure.
getting a lot of numbers. And now you kind of see it on the back end where a lot of these decks aren't selling out anymore. Obviously Fontaine sells out, but they're not selling as fast as they used to on the secondary market. And anyone decks aren't even selling out that fast on their site anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people are flooding the market. These brands are just printing and printing and printing and printing all these decks, and people are like, okay, cool, like you just had a deck 2 weeks ago, and here's another deck, and there's another deck in 2 weeks from now. And I think
Yeah.
if you're putting out too many decks,
Gets to be tough. Yeah.
it's definitely tough for people to keep up. And then once they're at a point where like I can't keep up anymore, then they're like, oh, I'm just going to get rid of the set because I can't keep up anymore, and there's no point in collecting it anymore.
Yeah, leveraging
Sure.
that completionist aspect goes both ways. It's a
Yeah.
double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's one of the best things I think that's ever happened in my personal collection is I was just like, you know what? I don't care if I have the whole thing. I buy decks that I like, even if it's, the third in a series and I can't find the first two. I'm okay
Yeah.
with that because for me, I can appreciate the deck that I have in hand. But a lot of people can't deal with that. And it's like, I personally, I think it probably from the commercial side of it is what you don't want. You want people jonesing for the whole collection.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, for a collector, the healthier way to approach it is like, hey, I can't have everything, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, and it's like because it's like in a way, I guess you could look at some of these brands that have a lot of variants, like Knox or Fontaine's, and they're just in a way like a smaller example of something like Bicycle. And there's very few people who are trying to have every version of a Bicycle deck that's ever come out, and that's an impossible mountain to climb. But like, it's possible to have every Fontaine or Knock deck. But those maybe do start getting into such high numbers that people,
Yeah.
especially who have come in on the back end, like if you weren't there from the launch of the brand and have been getting them progressively over the years as they've come out, like if you get into card collecting in 2021, decide that you love Fontaines and want to get them all, like
Yeah,
good
good
luck to
luck.
you.
Good luck.
Um,
Even if you could find them all, it would cost you so much. It's crazy.
I mean, the price
Exactly.
wise for most of them aren't crazy.
No, but it's the rare.
That's
It's the
good.
rare ones that you really that
Yeah,
hit the
I would
hit the
imagine more
hardest.
so the difficulty in
Yeah.
finding
It's the
someone who's
black
willing
and the
to let
red
go.
one. The pink
Yeah.
one you can get for I think 100, $150. And that's
Yeah.
like
Still,
a
that's
third.
crazy.
I mean, it is, but
Yeah.
on the on the grand scheme of things, it's like they have 40 decks now. I think 20 decks came out this past year.
I couldn't imagine
Wow.
trying to play catch up and looking at spending potentially several $1,000s. So that's the thing that I think
For
gets
sure.
me.
Yeah, I
Now,
mean, you're typically going to spend a couple grand for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the one, the black and the red are the ones you're going to pay a lot of money for the most
yeah,
part.
it's
But
crazy.
And that's the thing, and I mean, so like at Penguin, we've been releasing a deck a month, but we're not generally doing V2s of much of anything. So the thing we've done the most of are honeybees, and we've
yeah,
done 7 or 9 versions, but that's over 6 years. But otherwise, like yes, we are putting out decks at a higher rate. We're putting out new decks every month, and then for the holidays, we're kind of increasing that as well. So we had 4 releases for October. We had the regular Room 237. We had the Gilded Room 237. Oh no, 3 in October, but 1 in the beginning of November. So within a 1 month span of early October to early November, we will have had 4. But aside from standard and Gilded of Room 237, which I have sitting right here. If anyone missed those did sell out, which is like
oh, will you look at
luckily and
that?
an unfortunate
We all have ours.
situation.
We all have ours at the desk.
All sitting
Dude,
there,
I
like,
love
in
it.
case
I
this
love
comes
it.
up, we'll be able to show it.
Oh, honestly, it's just been sitting there since the last time we had the show. I love this deck.
Nice. I like to hear that.
I just
And
sold
then
out, so I don't have any more. Sorry, people.
Oh man, we put out this oak nut set during 52 plus Joker,
So
and
cool.
then we have the roasters, the coffee deck coming out for early November. So a lot of different themes and stuff. So I don't know. I'm sure there are hopefully some people out there who are trying to be Penguin completists who want to buy one of every deck that we put out, but I don't think that is happening as much because we're doing so much variety of style and design. Like,
Yeah, you guys
the
treat the
robot deck
brand.
is gonna
Yeah.
have different appeal versus the Wrangler's Old West deck versus the Room 237 versus our Christmas deck, which I'll give you all a sneak peek at that as well. So yeah, we have 2 main releases for November.
Dang,
So early
two
November will be
sneak
these
peeks.
roasters. So those are
Nice.
coming in just a couple of weeks, whatever it is, a week and a half, something like that. These will be out,
Nice.
the roasters. So those are real fun. And so these were designed by Drew Hughes, who also did the Jellyfish deck and the Ace Invaders.
Which was
Um,
both great decks.
Yeah.
and then we have our Christmas deck, which this one's really, I haven't teased this on Insta or anywhere. We have our gingerbread deck.
So
I'm
coming out
excited for this one.
Christmas.
This thing looks awesome.
And
Looks
so
so fun.
this one is with Douglas, who designed the retro rockets and the robot deck earlier
cool.
this year. But yeah, just super fun. You know, Christmas, if there's ever a time where it's appropriate to do a lighthearted deck, like multicolor fun thing, you know, that's the time of year for it. And then that also is our new stock and finish. So
Yeah.
at 52 plus Joker with this Oak Nut set, we debuted a new stock and finish that we call Ultra Lux.
Nice.
And so that one is pretty limited. We do still have some sets left on the site. So yeah, Oak Nuts around, but we only made 250 of those sets. So that's not going to be
Show
something
those
that a
tuck
lot of
boxes
people
so we can get people
play with.
over there.
Yeah. Go over to Penguin and type in Oak Nut, which is, it's just another word for acorn. It's like an old timey word for acorn. But so what this set is
So pretty.
I'm backwards in my camera, so I'm moving the wrong way. So you get a standard deck and a gilded deck. And so the standard one comes in a nice gold stamped box. So the standard is ink and paper. So like the brown, this is all on white paper. So brown ink on white paper. The gilded one is actual brown paper. So matte brown paper. And then all stamped in gold foil, super ornate and detailed.
cool.
Looks so
and
good.
then it has
Gilding
like this
color on it. Is so
deep
dope.
bronze, sort of brown
Yeah.
gilding. Come
That's
on,
a color you
camera.
don't see often too, and I feel like Steve and I have talked about it in previous like lives, maybe about how people don't gild brown, but it's because it's hard to find a deck that looks good with it, and that just pops.
Yeah.
Sure, and that's always my thing, is trying to find, like, nothing against any color of gilding, but like gold and silver are starting to become like my least favorite gilding options.
Yeah.
Because when you look at like really colorful ones, so we did like the purple Jerry's Nuggets, we did the blue on the jellyfish, and so then like with Room 237 we did this orange.
Yeah. It's so
And when you have just like this super bright, colorful, like, for me, there's just like a lot more appeal to this than just, you know, not that there's anything wrong with gold or silver, but
right.
you start to see a lot of it, I guess, and it just kind of like, meh.
And it works. You know, a lot of people, I think, just throw gold and silver on a red deck or a blue deck, and I'm like,
Sure.
Or
cool,
like you
guys
can't
are
find a
gilding it.
good
You know,
match.
silver,
Yeah.
silver will look dope with blue for sure. But it's like,
Yeah, and so
you can't
we
just
did that,
throw,
like,
you can't
we
just
did
throw
the
a gold and silver on a deck and expect it to look good.
totally agree. Yeah, we did like silver gilding on the blue glider backs,
Yeah.
which was our mark deck that came out back in the spring. Because yeah, blue and silver look good together. But yeah,
Right.
some combos come out, and so yeah, we try and pick a gilding color, and we're not doing gilding for everything. So like these two that I just showed, the roasters and the gingerbread, there won't be gilded editions of those, and
Yeah.
we could have, you know, I mean, it's not that difficult a thing to throw gilding on them, but
So I
these are
gotta
ones
say,
where
I
we
think
just were like,
there's a
yeah,
good
didn't
gimmicky gilding you could do on the gingerbread though, because I think because it's Christmas, they have and this is where I think we're starting to see some innovation with gilding, whether that's good or bad, is the segmented styling of it. So obviously everyone's big into hollow now, but we're starting
yeah
to see like that rainbow striped gilding. That would have been
yeah
a dope one because it would have almost been like the lights reflecting off like a band at Christmas lights or something. But yeah,
sure
it's so tough. And you know, like Steve said, you know, you can throw silver, you can throw gold on pretty much anything. Doesn't mean you always should. And I feel like a lot of times if you feel like you're struggling to find a good color for a gilded
yeah
deck, the solution isn't throw on gold or silver because it's neutral. It's just don't gild the deck.
Yeah.
right
It's like
For
when
sure.
a photographer throws a picture in black and white. It's like, bro,
Yeah.
you can't just
yeah
throw
sometimes
black
it's a
and white
great
on an
idea,
image. You can't
sometimes
just
it's
pull the
not.
color out and
Yeah.
expect it to be a good image. It's not
Yeah,
how it works.
you have to plan that out from the
Yeah.
jump, and I think that's a big thing for it. We actually had a really good question that came in a little bit earlier that I want to touch
Oh,
on
yeah.
here from Stu Batman, which I think touches on your historical aspect of marked cards here. Stu
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know if you know what the first marketed marked deck was. It was like a
Oh,
tongue
wow.
twister there.
I don't know if anybody actually knows that.
Interesting.
So the first marked deck, so the same as they say that, you know, card tricks are probably as old as cards themselves. so are cheating techniques and marked cards. It's like
Right.
whenever people can find an opportunity to make money, it won't take them very long to find it. So marked decks themselves came about very shortly thereafter playing cards themselves did. And some of that history is just so old and so murky that we don't totally know. Um, and so there, I gave a talk on marked cards for 52 plus Joker last year. If you just search for my name on YouTube here, you'll find my channel, and I have it uploaded on there. Kevin Reylek, Reylek. Um, and I talk about there is a reference that I got turned on to from Steve Forty, who is a gambling and mark card expert. And he had found this through Bill Kalush, who runs Expert Playing Card and the Conjuring Arts Research Center, that there is a European police report talking about how card factories should make sure that they do things like even making sure that they always print their cards with the grain of the paper going in the same direction, because theoretically it's like if you printed some with the grain going this way and then maybe all of your court cards with the grain going this way, you would have ostensibly a factory marked deck based on using these different papers. And that went back to like 400 or 500 years ago. So yeah, they're super duper old. I can't say with certainty what like the first decks were that were marked decks that were like advertised towards magicians. Those I think would have been more in like probably the 1850s and onward, but I would have
That's crazy.
to do a little more of a deep dive on that.
Get
Well,
on
and
that,
with the
Kevin.
history,
You have 10 minutes.
with the history of playing cards though, too, going so far back, who knows what got lost to time? That's the other crazy thing about it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, dude, I think that was actually a really good question too, because I think it's interesting to see when that shift came. And like, I know prior to really getting involved in like playing cards, for me, when someone would mention a marked deck of cards, my first thought would always be more so to like card sheets versus Magic, you know?
Yeah.
So and obviously you're not gonna be out there being like, oh, buy this marked deck of cards and win every poker game. Like that's surely, that's
That's
not
if you
how.
get shot in the head first.
Yeah, like that sounds like a trap the casinos are running to break your fingers ahead of time. Like it's just not working out great there. So it's really interesting to see how it has kind of taken that shift where Magic, you obviously would market marked cards because Svengali decks, things like that, all these different types of decks that have gimmick purposes, marked decks fall right into the mix with that, where you want people to know that there's a tool for Magic.
Yeah. And that's where you see nowadays people will put the disclaimers on there. Hey, this is for entertainment purposes only, not to be
Yeah.
used for gambling or whatnot. Because yeah, the earliest marked decks, 100% were for gambling, and
Right.
then there's that just same as there's a lot of crossover between Magic and like card collecting and card producing. There's a lot of crossover between Magic and gambling because a lot of sort of the techniques and moves and technologies that first came about for gambling, more ethical people were like, oh, hey, we could just do this same sort of thing for magic tricks. Uh, so yeah, the earliest mark decks certainly were used for advantage play, um,
That's
and then
funny.
magic.
Yeah, we're talking to Jeremy Griffiths, and he talks to those underground sharks and people that have been playing poker and gambling for a long time, and it's like these guys are just so good at sleight of hand, where
Yeah.
it's like they created moves so many years ago before anybody else was doing stuff, and it's their card handling is impeccable, so it's cool to
Yeah. And
see
those guys,
that.
because they're truly underground. So like we look
Yeah.
at like the top sleight of hand artists today. And certainly, I think some of them could sit at a card table and get away with the things that they would need to get away with.
Right.
But that's a very small percentage. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, I think most of the people who are out there really doing the work, they're certainly not advertising it. They don't want a single person to know what
Right.
skills they have because for them, it's the difference between, being healthy and being not, or being alive and being
Yeah.
not.
And so with your
yeah, it's
fascination of
funny.
marked decks though too, did that really kind of tie into the idea of self-marked decks? Like you said, the idea of back in the day, people would be like, oh yeah, come buy this deck that's been hand marked for $1, $2. Have
Yeah.
you ever played around with the concept of hand marking decks yourself for Magic purposes and kind of dove
Oh,
into
sure.
that world? Okay.
That's something. And so, I mean, I'm sitting here. I had him sitting here the other day because I'm looking at putting together a little product soon. I'm going in a couple of weeks to this convention called Tricks, which stands for Tri-Seas. It's the Carolina Close-Up Convention. It's
Very
put on
cool.
by Scott Robinson out of the Charlotte area in North Carolina. So good, easy drive for me. And so like there's tons of magic conventions out there, and some are very broad where everyone who attends, you'll have a mix of stage, kids performers, mentalists, close up, whatever. This one is specifically geared as a close up convention, and there's usually 100, 150 people, something like that. So it's a pretty cozy one, and it just has like such a great vibe. Always a great line of performers. Scott really just throws it together super well, and so I've been going to that every year for a long time. And so one thing that I've been wanting to put together for that is sort of a project on how to mark your own cards.
Nice.
Not just in terms of some of the tools and markers that I prefer to use, but like just some of the techniques and things that are out there and things to keep in mind, because really any modern design you can mark in some way or another. Some are more easy and obvious than others, but there are just certain things that you can keep an eye out for where you're looking for, certainly things in a multiple of 4. If you have a little group of 4 design elements or something, then you can use those to mark both suit and value. Value through a binary system, because you're just dealing with the values of 1, 2, 4, and 8 to add up to your 13. And then obviously the 4 suits. So you don't need a lot to be able to do that. And obviously most designs have 4 corners and all sorts of things. So I've played with that a lot, both creating marking systems for printed decks. So one of the ones that I'm most proud of was the variant that we came up with for the first signature Nox, the Pandrea ones, which were white and just had one black line on them.
Yeah.
Because starting with the V2 Nox, we had them marked for suit. And just with the corners. So the corners would either be pointed or rounded, and depending on the number of pointed corners, that lets you know the suit. And that has carried over into a majority of subsequent knock releases. But with that signature series, where Alex wanted to literally just have it be plain white and just this one black border line, as I was looking at it, I said, oh, because we have this black border line, I said, we now have an outer corner of that and an inner corner of that. And so we were able to use the outer corners for suit and the inner corners for value on a binary system. So we were able to have this fully marked deck where the design really was just a
So cool.
rectangle. So that was really fun to put together, and it was not mega practical. Like you could read it, but it took a second. It was certainly not as quick or easy as a lot
you need
of,
to, or
of the other ones out.
I would need a microscope to read that thing.
Practice makes
and then even
perfect,
I
I
think
guess, in that
the
case.
current Nox, the all the foiled ones that are the riffle shuffle, the luxury Nox, they use a variant on that marking system that we came up with back in, I guess that would have been like 2014-ish, thereabouts.
Crazy, man.
That we did that. And so then, obviously the biggest, most successful one I've been involved with was the Marked Maidens that we've sold at Penguin. That was really fun to put together. Because there you're within the parameters of an existing design. So, magicians still across the board use bicycle more than anything else. And part of that is because it's so well established and so easy to get, but also there are so many other gaffs and gimmicks available in those designs. And so a magician, if they're doing a gig and they want to switch between a normal deck and then a trick deck and then a marked deck, let's say, they don't want that to be obvious to their audience. So they don't want to be switching from a bike deck to a blue tally-ho deck to something else. They want to not appear that they're actually switching decks. And so with just the proliferation of gaffs and gimmicks that are all available in bike, we wanted, a bicycle marked deck. But at that point, USPC was no longer allowing alterations to rider backs because they're protecting that trademark so strongly. And that's fine. Like, I understand that. And so they had created the mandolin and the maiden backs as options for magicians that could be customized for these various tricky decks. So we were within the parameters of that maiden back design of just where we could put marks. And then it's figuring out like, all right, exactly where do we want them? How big are they going to be? Blah, blah, blah. And so, that was a good chunk of work for our little team. But, we printed up a few different prototype versions of it. Because, you iterate. You say, this one looks good. Let's print 3 decks and see how they look, and then you go back and kind of, because you want real world testing. Like there's only so much that you can tell when it's on a screen. So
Right.
whenever I'm doing a printed marked deck, the first thing I do is just print it out at home, just to look at it, and say, hey, what's it look like from a foot away? What's it look like from arm's length? And then, yeah, ultimately trying to kind of strike that balance between legibility and camouflage, because you don't want it to be so large and so glaringly obvious that when you hand the deck to someone and say, here, shuffle these cards, they go, wait a second, there's a giant letter A on here.
Yeah.
So
Now, is there a huge market for mock decks, or is it just
it's pretty big. A lot of magicians do like to use marked decks for sure. And then especially for a long time, factory printed marked decks really were in the 30-ish dollar range. So people would use them, but they felt like they had to be kind of precious about them. So it's like if you were going and performing at a restaurant, you would certainly have a couple decks on you. You would use your regular deck for most tricks, because like if someone puts it down in a puddle where their beer was on the table, like now that card is ruined, and you don't want that to be a card that came from your $30 marked deck. And so that was one thing that Penguin really shifted with our marked maidens, was that we wanted to produce a marked deck that people could just kind of use and trash, where it was like, hey, if you want to do routines that require a card to be folded or torn, or you want to have cards signed and give them away to people, or just whatever, cards are paper, they only last so long. We wanted a deck that people didn't have to worry about being like super like protective of, and treat it like it was a fragile baby. And so those decks are $10 a piece, or $5 when you buy a brick. So the bricks are only $60, so that people really can just like be like, hey, this is the deck that I use. And we've gotten a lot of great, those have been on the market since 2017. So a good 4.5 years now.
nice?
That's really cool.
Now,
Yeah.
just a question,
Yeah.
just curious, is why are mock decks typically $30?
I think
Is
they're
it
not
because
anymore.
the added value of
Yeah, for a long
tricks or
time
something?
it was the added value, and I think the speed and scarcity, so like the earliest factory printed mark decks were kind of also in those earlier custom deck years. So like, 2005 was when that first factory printed Bars Wild bicycle deck came out. And that's, super early, around the same time that Illusionist was doing their first decks. And yeah, it was the added value, but also the risk. I mean, I'm sure that they had to print at least the minimum run of 5,000 decks at USPC, and they needed to get a return on their money. And it wasn't something where they were necessarily likely to sell out of 5,000 of those mega quickly. So like, yeah, putting it at that price, I'm sure was, you know, partly just a business decision, but then also I'm sure probably to protect the secret, and because, good methods in magic have a lot of value. There are people who say that like the fake thumb that comes in every magic kit in the world should actually be sold for like $100, because of how powerful a tool it can be when used the right way. And so same thing, just as you can get kind of these cheap crummy marked decks that are real hard to read that come in most magic kits, a good marked deck, you can do miracles with it. So yeah, I don't think $30 is a crazy price to pay for a marked deck, other than, yeah, if you do actually want to go use it and perform with it, you're kind of like, oh man, like this thing's expensive and it's going to wear out. It's one thing, if you buy a $30 prop that's made out of really durable metal or plastic that is going to last you years, but cards are paper. You can only use them so much before they're just not going to be so good anymore,
Yeah,
even if you're using clean hands and everything.
it's so interesting because obviously Tyler and I have gone through some gimmicks and tricks, and seeing some of these prices is just crazy. It might be something
Yeah.
that's this big, that's a piece of plastic, and they'll charge $50 for it, and it's like,
Yeah. And again, I'm sure a lot of the time that can be economy of scale. Like if something is handmade or made in a small batch, like, anything, if it's being factory made, it can be difficult to find a factory to make, in the magic world, sometimes 3,000 units is a lot, whereas sometimes you go to a factory and they'll laugh at you if you're trying to do anything under 10,000 units, because for
Yeah.
them, 10,000 is super small. So yeah, I get that, because magic is such a niche world that, if you're either making something by hand and you sit down and it takes you an hour to make, and you potentially want to like sell it through shops, and so you're going to need to offer wholesale rates, then yeah, something tiny and simple could be $50,
yeah,
for those production reasons, and yeah, to help keep away the curious, so that only sort of more serious magicians will get into it. Because yeah, someone who's just new and starting, they gonna look at it and be like, I'm not paying $50 for a magic trick. And so you see that, Renault. I've seen people sell sets of cups and balls that are made of high-end materials. They're made of silver or whatnot, and they'll spend thousands of dollars for a set of cups
Jesus.
and balls, where it's like, yeah, you could go buy a $20 set that you can still do the trick with the same way. And so that has obviously the art element to it as well. um, but so yeah, I mean, it's sort of a similar thing as with cards. Most of them cost a few dollars to print, but why are some $10 and some are $20 with similar features? Um, Same with Magic. Why are some things $10 and others are 50? For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, and some of it
Yeah.
is just because they want to charge that much.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, this is what I feel my thing is worth. This is what I'm going to charge for it. Because there are plenty of people who are releasing Magic not as their full-time thing or their main source of income. It's something on the side that they're doing out of the love of it. And so they say, yeah, I'm willing to put this out there for the handful of other people who also want to do it, but I'm not going to sell it for no money.
Yeah.
And
So we actually had another good question come in here earlier from Joel. Joel
Yep.
wants to know, what do you have? Do you have a favorite or prized deck?
a favorite or prized deck. Yeah, I have several. A lot. I have a lot of decent. I'm looking up at them now. Older Deland decks. And so those are cool to me just because of Deland's position of his innovations with mark cards and with Magic in general. So there's this red book behind me. Is this huge book by Richard Kaufman about Deland, which I would highly recommend to anybody. It's like part biography, part magic book. But this guy invented so many tricks and methods and techniques that we just sort of take for granted today as having been around forever.
Yeah.
But we know like he invented them. So a lot of my vintage Deland decks are sort of prized things in the collection. I have another one. There's a very famous close-up magician, Di Vernon. He was a
Mhm.
Canadian magician who then was big on the New York scene in like the 1930s, and then mostly that was known as sort of the resident professional. He was known as the professor out at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, and just had such a huge impact on modern magic and particularly close-up magic. And so I picked up through the 52 plus Joker convention one year. Someone had brought a deck that had been owned and used by Di Vernon, and so he's just such an important figure in the Magic and card worlds. And he actually died the same year that I got into Magic. I think he was like 94 when he
Oh,
died,
wow.
but I got into Magic in 92, and that's when he died. And so I never had the opportunity to like go see him perform or at a convention or anything. But so yeah, it's cool to have a deck that he actually owned and used in my collection.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Now,
And
what is? Do you have a white whale that you want in your collection?
Yeah, one that I never expect to get. I have the replica up here. So Richard Kaufman, when he did the Deland book, also reprinted several of his decks, including this one called the Wonder Deck. And there are 6 known decks left of like originals that were printed, back in the day. And it's not
6
a beautiful
originals?
deck. Yeah, six originals. So
Oh,
having the
interesting.
reprint is good, but so this is an edge marked deck. So yeah, not beautifully designed
It looks like
artistically,
paintbrushes.
but if we
Oh,
bevel,
cool.
so you can see those edge markings there.
that's so cool.
And so like that's the cool thing about seeing decks now, like because a bunch of edgemark decks have been coming out on crowdfunding, especially since Andre had such success with his butterflies.
Yeah.
But so to see something that was designed, in the 19 teens, so
With that
that's
kind of,
my
yeah, that's
replica.
really
So
cool.
I would love to get one of those originals. I don't expect that will ever happen because there's 6 known, and so they're very expensive.
I can only imagine. That's gotta be
Um,
crazy.
Do you know who
Yeah.
owns those 6?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
Yeah, private collectors.
I was
I
wondering
would
if you
imagine
knew them.
Richard has one because of the work that he's done on the Deland book. I know he has quite a Deland collection. But yeah, I don't know who has the others. And then others would be, I would love an actual 1913 dollar deck. I have Richard's replica, and I have various ones from over the years in various conditions. And I have, I have like a design of his league back and his star deck and whatnot. So yeah, any of those old like actual like a first printing of a Deland one would
That's
be
cool.
kind of a white whale for me. Yeah.
Now,
That's awesome.
So if
who's
anyone
your
out there has a lead on any of those,
You definitely
you
let
let me
Kevin know. Definitely hit him up on Instagram. His link is down in the description. You should follow him anyway, but let him know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for sure. Now, who's your favorite current designer of playing cards? Do you
Of playing cards in general.
do you lean towards a specific brand that you like the designs, or you like the
Like I mentioned, I'm collecting marked cards, so
yeah
those can come from anyone. In terms of a designer who I just like pretty much always love everything they do, I would say Mark Stutzman certainly comes to mind.
yeah
And that was like a huge bucket list thing for me. So when I had come to Penguin and we were doing the playing card division, like I was such a fan of split spades and just everything that Mark was doing. And when I very first started in the deck world, like when I was looking into doing my second deck after I had done the lefty deck, I reached out to Mark because you can Google and find his website. And so I just emailed him through his website and I was like, hey, I'm like a new card producer. I was wondering, like, are you available for projects? And at that time, he was still pretty much exclusive to Blaine for anything magic or card related. So he could
right
be hired. And I mean, this guy's he designed the Elvis stamp, for crying out loud, but he's
Yeah.
designed Stephen King book covers and like the Jurassic Park collector cups for McDonald's back in the day. Like, and he's
Crazy.
just the nicest, most humble guy. I first met him in 2015 at the 52 Plus Joker convention. So
That's cool.
another plug: if you're not in the club, if you're into playing cards and you're not in 52 Plus Joker, you're missing out. But yeah, Stutzman is so good. So that was a thing that I was just like, I would love someday to be like to do a deck with Stutzman. And so when I pitched to the bosses at Penguin the idea for Emperor, I was like, hey, we're Penguin, we should do a Penguin themed deck. And I was out in my backyard mowing my lawn, and it just came into my head. Like I was like, oh yeah, Emperor, like kind of like the bicycle banner. Emperor. Like that'd be super cool.
That would be really. That was a
And so
dope
pitched
deck.
that. Yeah, and I was like, oh, and it's got to be Stutzman. And so, yeah, reached out to him, and at that point, then yeah, he was no longer, I guess, totally exclusive to Blaine for Magic and Cards. So we worked out a deal, and we got it all put together. So, yeah, in terms of like. And not to take, there's plenty of artists who my ears will perk up if I hear that they have a new design out. But that one certainly, if someone's like, "Oh, there's going to be a new Stutzman deck," I'm like, "Who are they?" Do tell.
That's cool.
So, and I know we said this is all about you today, but we did get one question that came in about the Room 237, and I want to get it out there because
Yeah.
we never know. I feel like this may have come up in our live about 237 as well, but is there any plan to release an uncut sheet of Room 237?
That's a real good idea. You know what? Maybe we can do it for Halloween itself, because we did have, so we don't get uncut sheets for every run we do, but we do get them for a lot. Because I'm like, it's not that much money to add to the print run, and it's like, so they just kind of are there. So most of the
Yeah.
decks that we've run, the minimum that USPC allows is is 25. So we do get 25 uncuts of a lot of our various decks. And we did get them of Room 237. But yeah, the market for uncut sheets has very much declined in all the years that I've been following the card world. Like in the early days, they would sell for anywhere from like $100 to $250.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and now they're way cheaper. And I credit / blame, I guess, depending on your point of view, Theory 11 for the drop in prices on those. I think they were the first ones to put one out that was like 30 or $40. And it seemed like almost overnight that became sort of like the new de facto number for uncut sheets. It was pretty amazing. And so I've seen some do real well over the years because we've released our decks directly and through Kickstarter. And sometimes on a Kickstarter, like the deck itself would do great. We'd raise plenty of money and get a lot of backers, but only move a few uncut sheets.
Yeah.
Because it's like that niche of a niche.
Yeah.
And so the people who are into uncuts to begin with, a lot of them have gathered more than they can hang on their wall. So in addition to these 4 behind me, I have a couple others on other walls. and I have tons more that aren't framed or on the wall because I just don't have the wall space for them
Yeah.
unless I put them like in every room of my house, which I'm not going to do. Um,
Why not?
but because my wife would kill me.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to live
Good
amongst that.
answer. Good answer. Uh,
Um,
he's excited just to have one wall to put them on. So
exactly.
Oh, for sure.
So the yeah, so
answer
the room
that it's a
237
maybe. Yeah,
uncuts. So the answer is yeah, maybe yes. Let me make a note of that right now.
because I do think that would be a
Just to
fun one
show
to
that
see
I'm
too, and that back
paying
design is
attention.
just beautiful.
Yeah, for sure.
But and we have, and you know what? We usually don't ask questions about specific decks or things around that
Ask me
nature. But
anything.
no. But for Kevin, I think for this one, this is actually a good insight on your end. Russ wanted to know, what are your thoughts around the DMCs, possibly the easiest to read in the world?
I hate them and I hate Phil Smith. No, I'm just kidding. No,
Uh,
I love the DMCs. Penguin was the original exclusive US distributor of the DMC Elites because I was such a big fan of them. So we've been carrying DMC Elites on Penguin since the Rouge decks way back when. And I've worked with Phil on a lot of projects all through Penguin. The first one was his Westminster deck, which is unmarked. But then we did several others. So when we did the Deland Centennial, which are based on two original Deland decks, the Nifty and the Daisy deck. So we took decks from my personal collection, scanned them, but then we wanted to make some changes that made them more appropriate for a modern user and just
yeah,
spruce things up. And so Phil was the one who did all of the actual work in Illustrator and whatnot on getting those spruced up and redesigning the tuck box. Because the old tuck boxes would not be appropriate to reprint today. That's a separate thing we can get into. So old, especially pre 1930 card boxes, it was very common in the early 1900s to have swastikas as a design element on playing card boxes
yeah.
because they meant a very different thing at that time. So yeah, the old Daisy and Nifty decks that I have, I don't mind showing them because everyone's
They're
gonna.
usually the old swastika though was going in the opposite direction. Usually, I don't
Yeah,
know how
you
it is
have
on the
both
Daisy and Nifty.
versions
I mean, on the
in,
Daisy, I mean the Deland's decks, but
depending on modern culture.
yeah, because I know. I mean, the swastika, obviously not as we know it today, but the opposite direction was used on a lot of, you know, Hindu statues. I know. I actually have a Ganesh statue that has it on his belly.
Interesting.
Yeah, it stands for.
So
It's like stands for kind of
So
like
these are
unity.
very old and obviously pre-war, and they are not in my collection. You know, it should go without saying, but I'm still gonna say it. You know, like these are for their historical value. Um, but so these are the ones. The actual cards inside here are the ones that were scanned to make the Centennial Edition. But yeah, for obvious reasons, we were going to redesign that tuck
Yeah,
box, and that's
yeah.
all Phil. So not to deviate too much from the topic at hand.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But so no, I love the DMC Elites. It's one of my top 3 marked decks. So the if I'm gonna go out and perform tricks for people, odds are I'm gonna do it with a marked deck, and I'm gonna use either the Penguin Marked Maidens, my own hand applied system for Tally Ho Circlebacks, just because that's like my all-time favorite back design. Like if you said
Nice.
you can only use one more deck of cards for the rest of your life, it would be blue Circlebacks. And then the DMC Elites. I have every version of them that's ever been released. And I think Phil, as a designer, because in addition to being an illustrator and graphic designer, he's a magician and a mentalist. So he really understands that balance point of readability and camouflage. And so he's always game to try new creative things. So we've done a few mark decks with him. We did our Screams at Midnight mark deck for Halloween last year
That was a
that Phil
fun
and I
one.
worked on together. He added the marking system to our Bicycle Wranglers earlier this year.
Nice.
We're working on something else right now that will come out in 2022. So big fan of Phil. He's a great dude. He's a great guy to work with, and he's a genius. One that I had nothing to do with. I'll just give him a pitch in general. This one he did as an
Yes.
independent Kickstarter, this Neural Miracle deck. And this has a lot of roots in like a Deland sort of thing where this is marked like 1,000 different ways, but in a
That's
very
really cool.
clever, very accessible, readable way.
Interesting.
So
Well, and he started
That
using
one's super cool.
some more technology oriented stuff with that, as well as some of the stretch goals on that campaign, which I
Yeah.
love seeing how that kind of ties into it now with the idea of like you mentioned earlier, like RFIDs and other kind of
Yes.
NFC style things
Yeah.
where people are starting to tie marking
Yep.
systems and cards, physical objects
Yeah.
into phone
So
readability.
to show the whole package, what you get with this, you get
So
this
cool.
deck, and then you get this wristband that when you tap it against a phone has an NFC chip in it, and there are routines and things that will be done, which is all for illusion purposes. This is
So
not
cool.
actually connected to the deck of cards. It's just a standard analog deck of cards, but the presentational things that Phil has added make it seem as though it's like a technology based deck.
Yeah, I
And
really
yeah, super clever. So
love that.
yeah, the DMC elites I love. I think if anyone's wanting a marked deck that is non-bicycle, like if you want a bike type marked deck, get the marked maidens, because I don't think you're going to find anything that's easier to read or more affordable. Um, but for for other ones, that if you want just like a pretty deck that also is very easy to read from a long distance, because the marks on his are equivalent to about a 40-point font size wise. So if you do have trouble with vision, they're pretty easy to read, and especially you get, a lot of marked decks you kind of max out 3-4 feet. His I can read from over 6 feet away easily, which can be a very useful thing when performing magic. So
That's cool.
yeah, to fully wrap that around and say what I think about the DMC elites, I like
Nice.
them. Um,
You hate them. We got it.
I hate them. I hate that he's so smart.
I think you're
love it.
pretty smart yourself, dude.
Oh, thanks.
Dude, especially like I
I
said,
put up a good front.
No, I mean, you've had your hand on so many decks in the past. You've really had you're a humble enough guy to probably deny this, but you've really helped shape, I think, the community around creative and custom playing cards since you've
Thanks.
got involved in it, and I think you've really, you're doing some great stuff, great stuff with Penguin right now. I mean, the cards that have come out this year, I know Steve and I have said it a million times, but we're hearing this from the community as well. People are so excited for these Penguin decks that are coming out
Oh,
every single
that's
time.
good to
And
hear.
it goes to show how much being in touch with the community and being in touch with the history and your own passion of these cards really comes through.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. And that has been a cool and gratifying thing to see. Like sometimes when people post pictures of their collections on social media or on Reddit or something, I do always scan through to see, like, oh, are there any of the decks that I've worked on over the years in there? And more often than not, there are, because yeah, I have done a lot. I mean, it's been 12 years. And yeah, obviously what we did at Blue Crown and HOPC, there was some good success there. So, I mean, I was heavily involved with those early knocks from the launch ones up through 2015 was when I switched from HOPC over to Penguin. Um, so you see those in obviously a lot of collections, but then yeah, you seeing any of the Penguin decks, the honeybees pop up quite a lot
Yeah,
in people's
which that's a great one.
collections.
And I got another
And
one.
those were fun. That was one that I had in mind for a good few years, and then when I came to Penguin, it was just there we go.
Love.
There's the
Yeah,
other big
dude.
three, the
I
first
love them.
bicycle branded ones.
Yeah, which I love. I think they're so great bicycle branded. It looks just like it
Thanks.
fits.
Yeah, and well, that was funny. So a little funny backstory on the bicycle branded ones, and again, nothing against USPC here. It's just that policies change
Yeah.
and come and go sometimes, as I guess either staff changes or whatever the case may be. So we had done the original honeybees, and my original goal with those, and partly for selfish reasons, was to do them B branded, because at that point I had done custom bicycle, tally ho, Arco, and Aladdin branded decks, but I had never done a B branded. And there
Nice.
was a big slew of time where B custom were allowed. But so when I went to them and said, hey, we have these honeybees, and it was B. And this was like right after they had closed down the policy where they said B is going to be exclusively for casino brand. And I get that casino brand is humongous and it requires tight security and whatnot. So they
Yeah.
said custom division can no longer use B brand. And I was
Yeah,
like,
it's a shame, but it makes
so
sense. Yeah.
yeah, I fought it mildly. It's like, are you sure? Like, you can't like make one exception here, kind of thing. But they were like, no, sir, go away. They've never said go away. The custom team at USPC is fantastic to work with. And so,
Looks
Steve
like we
left, and
lost
now we
Steve
look
there.
weird.
Sometimes Steve's internet dips out a little bit. So you know what? You can be Steve for the time being. We'll deal with
All right, I'll be
that.
Steve.
Yeah, and
um,
like you said, there's a lot of security around that. It makes sense that they have to limit the custom
yeah.
brand there. So
Exactly. And so some of the limitations, as much as I want to do whatever I want, it's their IP and they have to protect it. And so I ultimately get it. I don't always take no as a first answer, but like I'll take it the second or third time. And they do try to be very accommodating with as much as they can. So it was a few years later, it was 2017, and we had designed the bicycle version of them for like the V2. And at that time, their brand managing, whoever was in charge of branding, just didn't want to do anything B related under the bicycle brand. They didn't want to
yeah,
cause like any confusion potentially between the two brands. So they were like, nope, no bicycle honeybees either. And so we were like, okay, no problem. And then for whatever reason, I don't know why, not at my pushing, I'm sure, um, they allowed it. They said, yeah, you can now do bee themed decks under the bicycle brand. And so 3 years after we had originally wanted to do it with these V3 honeybees, we were able to put bike branding on them. And the feedback
that's
on that has
awesome.
largely been positive. I've seen a few people who are like, I wish these were still unbranded. And I get that. Like, you can't ever please 100% of the people 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But the majority that I've seen have liked the switch to bicycle on that particular printing. Um, so yeah, so those were fun. Um,
Dude,
I
I
forget how
definitely
we
gotta
even
say,
got on that topic.
I mean, I think just, talking about some of the great decks out there that you guys have worked on. I was thinking about this before too. I think a fun and we might have to kick this idea around a little bit more, but we might have
mm,
a fun game show idea for the 24-hour episode where we just show decks and be like, who worked on it, Kevin
no,
or Ito, and we can have a little bit of a showdown there.
that's pretty funny. In some cases, the answer is both.
Oh my God, yeah,
Um,
and that'll be fun. Those
yeah,
will be the trick questions.
right. And well, so that's funny also. So that first deck that HOPC did with Ito, which is Ito's first deck, was also the first ever EPCC custom run for a third party client. So
Yeah,
Kalush had established expert playing card, and he was printing his Global Titans, I think were the first ones that were coming out under that brand, and certainly from that factory. And I was living in New York at the time, as did Alex, as did Bill Kalush. And so, yeah, the nautical decks that Ito designed were the first custom expert decks for someone other than expert. So they were an HOPC custom run. So yeah, that's a particular deck of note now, I guess, just because of where Ito went and what expert has become and whatnot. So
yeah.
yeah, if you can find any of those old nautical decks on there, they're probably worth at least $1 more than they originally sold for.
I wouldn't be surprised by that too. That they're actually, I think they're kind of hard to find too. And I think,
I think so. They weren't a
yeah,
big run. We
yeah,
did red, blue, and then a white deck. And the white deck was
nice.
cool. It had like this all over rope design. And that one also was kind of bee inspired, like a diamond back thing, but it was all done with like ship ropes.
Yeah,
And that was so like to aspiring designers out there. So Ito had pitched us several times at Blue Crown HOPC before we actually finally did that nautical deck. So like if there's anyone out there who's designing decks and you're sending them to companies or whatever and they're not moving forward, I would say don't give up. Just keep honing your skills, keep trying new ideas and putting them out there, because Ito had been very um active on our Facebook and whatnot. We used to do like these release contests where people could send in photos or do videos. So we had photo and video contests where people could win free decks as we did
that's
new
cool.
releases. And he was very much a big participant in those. And so then he just would occasionally email us a design idea. He'd send either a sketch or something kind of more fleshed out. And he'd be like, hey, look at this deck. And we'd be like, yeah, that's not bad. But we didn't just, it's not that they were bad. They didn't feel like the right fit for what we wanted to do as a company.
Yeah,
But then when he sent us the articles, we were like, yeah, like this one we really like. And so we move forward with it. So, I'm sure the same as, people who are trying to break into acting, they get told no 100 times before they finally get a yes, that sort of thing. So, yeah, if and that, and I mean, if you really love something, obviously now we have Kickstarter, so it's like if you love something enough, like go ahead and put your own time, money, and effort into it. Like you don't need a bigger company to get your deck off the ground, and that's more true now than ever.
dude,
Um,
no doubt about that. I mean,
yeah,
especially with the lowering of the limit from 5,000 to 1,000. I mean, printing your own decks at this point, even if you want to print one, is accessible. It may not be cost
yeah,
effective at one, but it's so much more
sure.
accessible.
But yeah, with Make Playing Cards, I've been using them for many, many years for prototyping or just ultra limited runs,
Yeah.
and they keep getting better all the time. I mean, they're
Their
way better
stock is
now than they
really good
were.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, and because now you can customize everything fully on a one-off. I remember there was a time where to get a custom tuck, you had to be ordering at least 100 decks. So if you
Yeah.
only needed 2 or 3 prototypes, they just weren't going to be in a custom tuck. But now you can get custom everything as low as 1. And even that is like 30-ish dollars to do that. Like it's not expensive when you consider what it is. Like it's a pretty high quality deck. And so for them to print, cut, package, and send a one-off deck, and then obviously they get cheaper as they go, if
Yeah.
you bump the numbers a little bit. But yeah, if anyone's just wanting their own deck just to fiddle with or prototype out or whatever, makeplayingcards.com. Yeah.
It's impressive. It really is. And I mean, honestly, once you hit that like 50 deck mark, you start to see the price point comes down pretty significantly and they become much more realistic. And yeah, the handling on them is great. They've done some
Yeah,
really great work
they
there.
have that M31 stock now, which is
Yep.
very good. It's a nice linen stock, and then I would recommend the beta finish. So yeah, if
Yeah.
you're hitting the website and you're looking for, you're like, I don't know which cardstock and finish to choose. The default that I recommend to people is M31 with beta finish. That's really nice. Yeah.
Dude, that's the way we. There you go. Stu Batman says Zazzle. I'm gonna tell you, I felt the
Oh,
Zazzle. I felt the Zazzle prototype not too long ago, and they are horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But
yeah,
can't.
nothing against you there, Stu. Welcome back, Steve.
You
I think Stu knows the pain. I think Stu knows the pain of a Zazzle deck. He's just playing with that one. But
Okay,
Oh, we're
yeah.
talking about
Well,
Zazzle decks.
yeah, that's one thing because when I very first made some prototype decks, this would have been around 2010, and
yeah,
I don't know if MPC was around or I certainly wasn't aware of them, but I saw Zazzle, and you see that thing because they have that licensing agreement with Bicycle, so they're like, print your own Bicycle deck, and you have a certain expectation. That's something that I would, if I were Bicycle, I would like revise the terms of that license or something because I don't think it's doing their brand any favors because the quality of the Zazzle decks is not good.
Dude, I don't
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. This is the best deck ever created. Well, you know what the funny thing is I got in a deck of bicycle cards. I got
Uh-huh.
a little ad card that said, print your own bicycle
Right.
deck.
Yeah.
So I went to Zazzle because that's where it brought you that link. It brought
Yep.
you to Zazzle. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And I printed this thing, and oh man, it's horrible.
Yeah. And not
Yeah.
that the print quality is bad, but just the coating and
Yeah, the
whatnot is
feel and
just
everything,
it's
yeah.
super clumpy and feels like sandpapery. And I mean, like I said, I did my first one with them like a decade plus ago, but from what I've heard, they have not improved things in that time.
No, I got
As
I got
opposed to
this.
MPC, who was good 10 years ago, and now they're even better.
I don't think Zazzle's main business model these days is try and print your own playing cards. You know, they're
I'm
doing
sure
the
it's
whole
not.
catch-all
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Sure,
You want a
sure.
calendar plus playing cards plus whatever else they got you, but yeah, it's not the way to go. Especially again with the price point you can get from places like Make Playing Cards. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it'd be one thing if the Zazzle ones were $5 for one, and be like, okay, that's kind of hard to argue with. But
I mean, they are cheaper, that's for sure. They are cheaper than the other one.
Yeah, but you
Okay.
get what you pay for in that aspect,
yeah,
I'd say.
100%.
in that case, I'm sure
Yeah.
you do. Yeah,
100%.
definitely.
Oh, man. Well, while we're out of here, does anyone have any last minute questions as we kind of wrap things up here today? If anyone's got any, drop them in the chat. I got to say, man, Kevin. So, Steve, while you're gone, I actually pitched this as a fun idea for the 24-hour episode. We're going to have Kevin and Ito on, and we're going to do a game show. And it's going to be guess who was involved with this deck. And we're just going to show random decks, and people are going to have to guess whether it was Ito, Kevin, or some combination of the two. So it should be
That's
a
cool.
fun little game show there. We'll have to flesh out all the details, but I think we could have a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll have like one on the show that Ito designed for
Yeah.
Kevin, you know? Who
Who
knows?
You can
knows?
always throw it in the mix. You never know with that. But dude, I gotta say, it's been really interesting today getting to hear about not only all of your involvement in the industry and kind of driving this custom industry here, but your passion for marked cards, for Magic, for playing cards in general, just comes through in your knowledge and your discussion. And I think it really just says a lot about how much this means to you and how much you like to bring that passion to people as well.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys having me on and giving me the time of day because Like, you know,
We've been
it
looking
is
to
such
have
a
you on for a
specific
long
niche
time.
thing. Yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate you guys being here and everyone else who tuned in to watch or threw out questions or whatnot. It's been a lot of fun.
So we do have one last one that came in here. Stu wants to know what's been the most fun deck to create for you.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That's tough. The Screams at Midnight that we did last year was a lot of fun. Like the brainstorming on that and
Yeah.
bringing the 3D element to it because it came with the red and blue paper 3D glasses. So yeah, right off the bat, that one certainly comes to mind.
Nice.
And I know that one had sort of a controversial marking system. If you look at the reviews for it, they're sort of all over the place. Because some people, and partly this is my fault and Phil's fault, like we've normalized very easy to read marked decks. And so ones now that are more difficult to read don't always get super well reviewed. And I come at it at a place from like comparing to like the old decks from 100 years ago that were meant for gamblers that are extraordinarily hard to read. So for me, I'm like, hey, yeah, maybe something takes an hour of practice, but it's still kind of easy to read. For a lot of people, the benchmark is like, can I read this the moment that I take it out of the box? And
Yeah.
for those people, I understand. Like, yeah, I've put out some decks that aren't that easy to read, but they're also not that hard to read if you're willing to put in some time and effort. And also, yeah, vision is such a personal variable thing. Yeah, there are some decks that some people can and some people can't read, but I mean, obviously I don't have perfect vision. And so I've kind of figured like if I can read something from 3 feet away with minimal practice, most other people should be able to. And yeah, I can't be responsible for other people's vision. So I do wish that the Screams at Midnight had been more universally acclaimed. But Phil and I certainly had a lot of fun putting that one together.
And that's what matters at the end of the day. Dude, Kevin, again, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, man. We really do appreciate you coming on. I mean, Steve and I have literally been talking about having you on since we first met when we did the 52 plus Joker in kind of like introduction video back last year. And
I can't believe it's already been a year.
It's
Man,
crazy,
time has
right?
flown
It's
by. Yeah.
crazy how quick time has gone. And honestly, like, we're excited to see everything that's coming out of your creative mind this year. And honestly, I think Penguin is just, they're doing some great stuff there, and they're lucky to have you in house because what you're driving there is just an amazing momentum with them. And I can't wait to see what else is coming out. We appreciate the sneak peeks too on the roasters and the gingerbread house cards this year. But I think 2022 is going to be the year for Penguin decks, man.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. We have the roadmap fully planned out for 2022. They're not all printed yet, but the designs on at least 8 or more of them are done.
Nice.
So yeah, we're trying to really kind of keep things rolling well and stick with this sort of monthly release schedule. And yeah, we have some cool stuff in store for everybody. And then yeah, the hard thing is like in the case of roasters, where this has been done for over a year design wise, but we're only just now putting it out. It's hard to sit on those and keep them a secret for that long when we want to just like share them with people. But
Yeah.
that's how it goes. So yeah, thank you guys for having me on, not just today, but all the past times over the last year. And I'm sure I'll be popping on again soon to promote something or other.
We will definitely be having you on soon. No doubt about that, man. We absolutely love having you on. Everyone out there also, we just want to say a big thank you to everyone who came in to watch the show today, whether you're catching it live or on the replay. While you're at it, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and also give Kevin a follow on his social media links. They are down in the description below because honestly, Kevin's an easily accessible guy. If you have any questions about Marked Card, feel free to reach out. If you're curious about what's coming up for Penguin, feel free to follow their Instagram as well because there are some dope decks coming out, and we honestly always love to see what's coming out of Penguin right now. So
Heck yeah.
it's been fun. Make sure to tune in tomorrow as well. We're going to be doing a special live unboxing of the Sky Member Playing Cards Origins deck, which is going to be a really interesting one for anyone who didn't see it. It recently finished up on Kickstarter maybe a couple months back. Super dope deck. We're going to be doing an unboxing of all of the fun add-ons and everything they had with that. And then this weekend coming up, we are actually taking a week off of the live show because of Halloween. So we hope each and every one of you out there has a wonderful, safe, and happy Halloween. Make sure to spend some time with your family, enjoy it, and we will see you the following week for a fun episode with the newly into the world of playing card creation, Luna Charlotte, who has a deck live on Kickstarter right now.
Yes.
Should be fun.
Thank you, everybody. We love you. Peace.